everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm so glad you're here. I've got a great show for you. I'm so excited about this show. Actually, I've wanted to have this guest on for so long. Theo Jordan is here with us. If you are not familiar with Theo, you should be. I'm just going to leave it at that. You'll see why. He is on X at Theo. Let's see. Well, we'll talk about all that later, but he's on X. He's on Substack. He is a lawyer and a dad from North Florida. But he got sucked into this madness around the same time I did. Although, I mean, I started long ago, but into the being public about it around the same time, early 2021-ish kind of thing. And he has become a voice of reason in the darkness. Someone I follow, someone who has great comments and just has a lot to say about what our schools are turning into. And I thought you should hear his voice. As you know, this channel is devoted to being part of the solution to our education crisis. So I hope you will subscribe to be notified when I make new content if you're not already subscribed. And please like and share this broadcast. We are live right now on Monday, September 25th. If you're watching on the replay or listening to the podcast, thank you so much for tuning in. But if you are able to watch live with us and comment, that would be great. Go tell your friends, share it out. So I'm going to bring Theo in. I want to let you know that because of what he does and his life and everything, he is actually anonymous. In fact, that's not his name. We don't know his name. So he will be off camera with just an audio avatar and joining us audio only. And we'll be sharing screens and we'll be talking about different things. It's going to be great. I hope you will bring your comments and your questions. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming my guest, Theo Jordan.
Hey,
hello.
Good evening, Deb. Good evening.
How
Thanks
are
a
you?
lot for having me on your show. I'm really appreciative of the invite.
Thank you for coming. I've been wanting to get you here for quite a while. I follow your account, and there are a few people, there are a select few people whose work I'm just consistently either bookmarking or retweeting almost every time. This is, what do we call it now when it's not retweet?
I think it's repost now or something. The whole X new branding drives me crazy. It's funny. You and I have known each other for a long time, but I don't think we've ever really chatted directly like this ever. So it's very cool to bridge it in a new direction.
I know. That's what's so great about, it's one of the upsides of social media. We complain about it a lot, but it can really bring people together and help us, get messages out and different perspectives. And that's what I hope to do this evening. So we titled the show, Teachers Are Not Shrinks. That was sort of your idea, and I agreed with it. It's obviously something I say all the time, but what made you want to speak out about that specific thing?
Sure. So I kind of use Twitter as a stream of consciousness, as some of you may know all too well if you follow my posts. I just have a lot of thoughts that come to my head. I feel like now's the time we all need to be sharing them, because a lot of important discussions and truths are being pushed to the side, and a lot of stuff is taking over our culture that is not very healthy for us. And there's this odd artificialness or this inorganicness to the discourse and even to the information that we're able to see. And so I have these thoughts that come to my head, and I just like shooting them out. And one of them that just continues to pop up there, and obviously I'm preaching to the choir here, Deb, but is this continued evolution or push of making our schools into a psychiatry center. And I think the thing that concerns me the most about it right now is how high we are seeing this come down from. This is speeches that are coming down from Pennsylvania Avenue. This is stuff that's showing up in state level curriculums and school guidance. And if you even heard Joe Biden over the last 2 or 3 weeks, he's given at least 2 or 3 speeches that were all in this vein. It'll start with setting up that empathy trap, right? That's what everything's used. So we talk about how children are really struggling with mental health. Here's this new study shows our children are really struggling with mental health. So there's a setup of this need, as always, this danger. And then the salve becomes, we, the state, need to intervene and help their mental health. And so there's this constant rhetoric about increasing guidance counseling, increasing mental health, reaching out in schools. And it's gotten to the point, it's like a WTF moment for me here. Like, what is going on? What is happening in the high level design of our schools that we're no longer talking about reading and arithmetic? We're talking about depression and gender spirits. So that's kind of where that, granted, like brash statement comes from. Our teachers are not meant to be shrinks. I would think most, if not all, reasonable minds should agree with that as a statement of fact.
Right. And the thing is, what I often hear is, well, it's not the teacher, though. It's the counselor or it's a social worker, et cetera. But as you've pointed out, with this mental health-ism, which Christine Jones and I talked about over the last couple of days, being almost like a new ideology that they're pushing in school, the teachers are taught to look for things and find things as if they are therapists, or, with that kind of lens, so to speak, so that instead of seeing what they might have seen as a kid, being awkward, having a difficult time during the day because they're tired or they're hungry or they didn't get enough sleep last night or any number of other natural vicissitudes of childhood, now it's like, oh, they're very shy and quiet and withdrawn. I wonder if they're depressed. What's going on?
Exactly.
Let's call the counselor. So the teacher is on like hyper vigilant alert to funnel kids into this mental health kind of thing. So even if they're not acting as a therapist, they're certainly pushing the kids in that direction.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the head. Of course, they would package it as being proactive, right? That we are trying to reach out to these children who are in this dire mental health need, and forever society has not been aware or attentive to these needs. So it's always packaged as this very noble endeavor, but you hit it right on the head. What's actually happening is it's a reaching out type of dynamic. Instead of us now looking for the child who may actually be in need of mental health care or some sort of counseling type intervention, we are now dispersing state agents across all of our student bodies, trying to sniff those out, trying to smoke that out. I go back to this guidance that was issued by the New York Department of Education. I want to say it was in May of this year. It was definitely in this year. I don't want to use the word binding because I'm not sure it's governing law. I think it's a high level state guidance for schools, but it's all about, to be frank with you, trans activism and gender identity. And I've written several threads about it. But if you drill down into it, it not only is straight up training state agents on how to seed this stuff and then most concerningly hide it from parents. But for example, to drill this down to a specific here, it talks about, again, packages, need, and safety, all these children with their gender spirits and their magical pronouns who aren't getting the right care in school. And I'm not making this up, Deb. What they guide, the guidance to all teachers across the state of New York, this isn't just New York City, is that they are to have regular pronoun sessions where they're getting the children together and they're all going over what are your pronouns. And I recognize that when we drill down to these specific fact patterns, people on the other side like to try to repackage them of, oh, well, this serves this goal, or, oh, this is that, or it's not going on, this, that, and the other. But if you think about the dynamics of that, Deb, and what that is designed to do, because in my opinion, I believe gender identity, as opposed to the extremely rare mental health condition of gender dysphoria, is a social contagion. It's largely something that is psychosomatic and that is planted in kids' brains. So if we are at a state level commanding our schools to gather children around, to have them go around and talk about whether they're a boy or girl, or maybe neither a boy or girl, maybe they bounce in between them, or whether they're a Z or a Zer, that goes right to the heart of what you're saying. What is the net effect of such an apparatus or a system? We're literally churning and cultivating more of the same issues. So pulling away from gender identity, it's the same kind of thing, whether it's depression. You can take it in a million different flavors, but if you think about it, it's the same machine or the same apparatus operating. And in my opinion, it shouldn't be in a reaching out perspective. Like, what in the world are we doing training our education system in America to reach out into children's minds to try to figure out what mental health issues they might have? I mean, in my opinion, it just greatly crosses into the domain of parents. I just don't understand how we got to this point, to be frank with you. Sorry, I got a little off track there.
No. And I obviously, I agree with you. I think what we forget sometimes, we get so activated by this as parents, as rational, sane human beings, and want to react to it. And what I try to do is step back and examine the premises behind it, because I think that will help us, fight it and help us make better arguments against it. So, for example, if you do the reaching out thing, you're operating under the assumption that some person can act upon a person to prevent any potential negative mental health consequence of anything going on in their environment. That somehow, if we get to the kid fast enough, we can prevent depression. We can prevent these kinds of suicidal ideation with there is literally no evidence of that. So while we understand that that environment is very important in terms of your mental state, your emotional state, we know that. We still don't 100% know why one kid, you could have two kids in the same family, the same, let's say, traumatic parents get divorced, and they could react completely differently. Like, individuals are individuals. One can be incredibly resilient and be like, mom was an ass. Oh my God, she's gone. I'm telling my personal story here, but whatever, like,
Right.
and be fine with it. And then you could have my sibling who completely melted down and all kinds of bad things happen. So, who was going to come in and go, oh, the parents are having problems. They might get divorced. Let's come in and act upon these children, and we will protect them from whatever the fallout is going to be mentally. And then they won't be as depressed. But no, it doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. It doesn't even work that well in a reactive sense. In other words, even if the kid demonstrably has some kind of trauma, there's not a ton of evidence with children in particular that psychotherapy, counseling, etc., is all that effective. And part of the reason, especially if it's about cognitive distortion or anything going on with PTSD, where you become hypervigilant, fearful, all those kinds of things, you have to be at a cognitive level with your ability to reason and think, forward, backward, all those kind of things that little kids are not all that great at doing, that psychotherapy doesn't really actually work all that well. And sitting around and talking about your feelings and hanging out in your feelings and navel gazing, which, by the way, is something that kids actually don't do all that much till adolescence. Kids before puberty tend to be like outwardly directed. They don't do a lot of like, oh, how do I feel? How do I think? Whatever. And so forcing them into that state is actually quite uncomfortable for them, because it's not a natural way to be. They're trying to understand what's out there. And then when they get to adolescence and it's a natural thing to do, it's like on steroids. So and I'm not a shrink. I'm just telling you, like, as a person who's experienced childhood trauma, a person who's experienced people trying to send me to therapy, people trying to do things. It's anecdotal, but I do know what doesn't really work all that well. And I've talked to other therapists who say, like, the premise behind this, that you can prevent negative psychological stuff by some lesson plan or some exercise or meditation or a counselor messing around in your brain all day. There's zero evidence that works.
Right. And see, I think we're touching on perhaps the most important aspect of this discussion, and that is the completely missing nexus between the problem that is created, the weaponized empathy is the term I like to use, but let's jack up this need that we all attach to: the child in need, the child in danger, the child who's suffering, the child from the broken home, whatever cues all those emotions and presents a valid need, right? Then we get to okay, we all agree there's this need here. Let's just hypothetically say we all got to step one. Step two becomes, and therefore, in order to prevent the damage that this need is going to cause if it's not treated, we are going to do X, Y, Z. And I think that's what you were just touching on is there is no, I hate the word science because it's been so manipulated and abused. There is no documented and established connection between, okay, I've identified, like you said, even if somebody demonstrably presents with, I am a mental mess, we're able to quickly see, okay, this child's parents are going through a divorce, there's drugs in the house, they're living in different places, whatever. Even if we identify these valid factors, there is no established nexus between, and therefore I will send little Johnny down to Sally, the guidance counselor. Sally, the guidance counselor, will pull out her toolkit of counseling this tool belt she was taught at some university in Amherst on how to straighten a kid out. And we're going to deploy these cookie cutter methods to get that child's head right. You see, there just isn't an established connection, or that term as we use in law, a nexus. I wrote, if you don't mind me sidetracking here real quick, I wrote a piece on my Substack titled exactly this: what is the nexus? And what this article came from was I'm part of a center left DM channel on Twitter I was invited to, and I'm very appreciative that I'm in there. There are people that I really admire and look up to. These are not leftists. These are not, crazy activists. These are awesome Americans who are on the center left side of the spectrum, and I learn a lot from that channel. And a decent amount of them have issues with a lot of the moves the right is making on schools. Understandably, so much in our country has become so blindly polarized with just rabid tribalism that I think everybody's on both sides are having difficult seeing the important stuff in the middle. But anyhow, as a response to my continual drumbeating in there about how queering children and queering education is not a good thing, teaching children they can change male, female, gender spirits, this should not be in schools. There was one afternoon where 2 or 3 of these individuals hit me back with stories of empathy. And I don't mean to paint them in a negative light here. They were doing it in good faith. But the stories, Deb, were along the lines of, I knew a child who I had a friend who came out to his parents as gay at 16 years old, and they threw him out on the streets. He barely even had the clothes on his back. He was homeless. He had to, live the rest of his life. Tragic story. I know a bunch of gay kids down at the local shelter. I volunteer there. They're down at the local shelter because when they came out to their parents, they were thrown out, this, that, and the other. This is all used back at me in a way to establish that ergo, or therefore, we should have books like Genderqueer in schools. We should be teaching dildos and butt plugs and very inappropriate sexual stuff to children. Or we should be pushing gender theory, the tenets, the idea that you can change from a boy to a girl. Or even that we should be having children giving presentations on this is asexual, this is pansexual, this is bisexual, this is demisexual, this is what all of those mean. And what I wrote in that article, because I was so struck by this conversation I had with, again, importantly, people I really respect, was, holy cow, there is a complete shattered or non-existent logical chain here. And what I mean, and I'll summarize this ramble here, is that we've got those fact patterns that we all agree are tragic. I think it's abhorrent if a 16-year-old child is thrown out of their house because they said they were gay to their mom and dad. I think it's heartbreaking that there's a dozen gay children at the local shelter where that individual, and I believe their story, told me they lived. But how does reading Genderqueer to elementary children or middle school children help any of those people? How does telling other children they can change from male to female help any of those people? How does any of this social justice activism that's going on in our schools help any of those children? It doesn't. It doesn't get the kid back in his house. It doesn't find homes for anybody in those shelters, right? So then you start to think, what is the net impact of that? In fact, if we go and seed this across our school system, let's push gender spirits, let's push trans activism, let's push queer plus activism, all these sex categories in that. Isn't that actually the more likely outcome going to be more hostility in homes, more issues rising in homes? You see what I mean? There's just a complete lack of nexus or connection between the issues proposed or identified and then the remedies proposed. And I've yet to have a single proponent of these ideologies or these methods in our schools be able to refute that to me, be able to connect that logical chain. I just don't see it. In my opinion, it's blind activism. It's social engineering.
I completely agree. And I'm so glad you mentioned the fact that, they still have to go home, or there could be more conflict in the home. And this is what baffles me. The argument they'll give is, well, we're going to increase tolerance and people are going to be more accepting and the kid will feel belonging, etc. But if you really believe, first of all, if the teachers truly believe that kids who come to school saying, no, I'm my biological sex, and, or I wouldn't want my parents to know about this, or my parents don't want me reading this. If you really believe that that's abuse, that abuse is taking place, you're duty bound to report it. You're mandatory reporters. So put your money where your mouth is and actually report it. So that's the proof they don't really believe it's abuse. They just believe it's a difference of opinion. But if it were abuse, they'd be reporting parents left and right. So then you have to ask, okay, so if it really is intolerance that you're trying to address by teaching the kid all this stuff at school, you're still sending them home to what you're classifying as intolerance / abuse. What does that make you?
Right, right, absolutely. And again, looking at the individual level, what is that doing for the individual child? Are we now changing the role of schools, that the school system are supposed to be these tentacles that reach out to every household? And if every household is not raising children in accordance with the plans that are being written in Washington, D.C., the state is to intervene and tell those moms and dads, no, 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 that is not the proper way to raise your children. Like, even on the individual, what exactly are we doing here? And then if you step it out to the societal level, and if you shotgun this approach across all kids, explain one example of how that's helping any broken homes. It's not. What it's doing is forcing, by state force, a ramrodding of the way, capital T, capital W, the way to raise children, which has been designed, again, by gender studies degrees people. And now that's being forced upon all of us, that we are being told we're inherently wrong if we don't raise our children that way. I got really fired up by, maybe that's the wrong term, I thought a very pivotal moment in this whole culture war occurred in Glendale, California, when that group of parents saw communist art at their local public school. This is a heavily Armenian community. There was a cross of children's art made. You could argue it was unintentionally put in the shape of a cross. I don't think so. But even if that was by mistake, it was a picture of Armenia with the pride flag. It had the communist fist right in front of it. It was a bunch of ideology that these largely Armenian and largely Muslim parents do not support. They came to that school board meeting. Things got a bit out of hand. They adjourned the meeting. They came back a few days later. Antifa sent out flyers, which one of the school district people retweeted to all her followers. And the Rainbow Guard, all white, bleached white, showed up to counter protest against these parents, which I'm not sure there was a single white individual in the whole crowd, even though the Truman Show and Team Biden and all of our media would later refer to them, all as white supremacists. And it got out of control. And in fact, the Muslim parents beat up a couple of the Rainbow Guard. The imagery looked pretty wild, but I wasn't excited about it because a brawl broke out. I thought it was a turning point because it destroyed this hate craft that the only people who are against queering children and pushing gender ideology in children are bigots and fascists and white supremacists and all of that. What was really going on there was a strong community rooted heavily in faith, religion, and family values, was watching their children being indoctrinated at the public school system with, to be frank with you, communist ideology. And if that word bothers you, okay, sub in some other one. Ideology that those families did not support. And I spent a lot of time retweeting and writing threads and articles talking about that event because I thought it was so important. And what I wanted to share is I bumped into an activist one time on Twitter, and it was just some rando, but they were engaging with me on this in good faith. It wasn't the typical, punch each other in the face and go our separate ways. And where they ultimately landed with me was a hypothetical fact pattern they came up with of somebody who has gender dysphoria. And the sentence they dropped on me was, they may not be accepted at that home. And I remember thinking what a heavy line that was, because I fired back at them, so effing what? And my point being, how is that the role of the state? Yes, you are correct. If that child comes home and says, Dad, I don't think I'm a boy anymore, I think I'm a zer, I'm almost willing to guarantee you those parents are not going to accept it. But where in the world have we gotten in this analysis? Why is it the state's role to tell us as mom and dads how we're going to raise our children? Just because you package that up as human rights or inclusivity spells, I have to relent to that and raise my children under your vision, or I'm indeed abhorrent and abusive? It's crazy. And see, Deb, if we can analyze it in a logical vacuum like this, it all falls apart. But we can't get there because this isn't the discourse happening nationally. It's Hillary Clinton pumping hate craft. And I don't know how we get out of that sinkhole. I really don't, because we just, in my opinion, this stuff collapses in the sunlight, but we're having a hard time getting it there. I think we're making progress, don't get me wrong, but there are times I feel like we have an almost insurmountable way to go.
It's very difficult because they have studied neurolinguistic programming and they are using it. They understand linguistics way better than the right to begin with, but that's not even the problem. The problem is, propaganda by definition is, truth married to a lie or several lies. And so as long as you're willing to lie, as long as you're willing to fabricate a pseudo reality and a pseudo logic to go with it and all of that, and you can twist words to mean, same word, different dictionary, like James says, you can get away with anything. You could just say whatever you want, and human beings are sort of hardwired to conform. So if you propagate that propaganda out to as many outlets as you have control over as often as possible, Joseph Goebbels told us this, it will be seen as the truth, even if it's gobbledygook, just because it's so
Absolutely.
prevalent. We saw this during COVID. This must be true because experts. This must be true because CDC. This must be true because we see it on CNN and MSNBC and all the places are
Yep.
saying the same things over and over and over. Then you enlist a few people in high places to tell you that anything that contradicts this is all bad things, bigotry, blah, 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 misinformation. And you've got to first cut through that linguistic minefield before you can even shine the sunlight on it. And people are feeling the pain of inflation. They're worried about losing their jobs. They're worried about losing their kids. We've now seen this come back to haunt parents in terms of custody battles, not just with
Yep.
divorced parents, but schools getting in touch with, one or the other parent if they feel like one is a little more woke. I just heard a story yesterday about a school calling a mom who was more woke than the dad because dad was asking too many questions about DEI. It wasn't even gender related. It was about like a little kid, like kindergartner. And they called the mom. The mom packed up the kids, moved to her mom's, took the kids, and is denying the father any kind of visitation because apparently he's making people feel unsafe with all his questions.
Terrifying.
And this guy now needs a lawyer. Like, so people are free, even if they agree with us, even if they're inclined to listen or take a look through the sunny, into the sun, they're terrified.
They are,
They're
and you
terrified.
hit it on the head. The propaganda is so thick. That's why we can't have this common sense discourse. A great example of this, it just did another round this week, even though it's a year-old story, is that damn Anne Frank graphic novel. And graphic doesn't mean sexual in nature, although it is that too. It means it's an animated novel. It's a cartoon book, a picture story. And last week, some Texas school fired a teacher for, all over our news headlines, reading Anne Frank's diary. Sounds horrible, right? Of course, that's not what happened at all. It was this one particular adaptation of Anne Frank that is very strange. And perhaps you can read it in good faith and say, I don't have any problem with this being at schools. I wouldn't really refute your position on that. But it's quite easy to see why some parents wouldn't want that particular adaptation of that book in schools. And this teacher took it even further. And after being told they weren't able to teach that book, went and taught that book, and then had the classroom specifically discuss the groping and fondling and the lusting for breasts that are all the emphasis of that book. It's not about the Holocaust and the hiding and the actual story of Anne Frank. It's actual passages from her diaries, but it's drawn out in a certain way that it is just the leftist gobbledygook. But the reason I'm bringing up that story was it told that way on a single headline in America last week? Of course not. From Randy Weingarten to Team Biden to the Obama Clinton sphere, they all said the same thing. It's Texans fire teacher for reading Anne Frank diary. And Deb, I went down one of these threads on Twitter last week and just posted a couple of the comments because it's bone chilling what is happening to our people under this system-wide propaganda. And the common response was, and I'm not making this one up, this is verbatim what I saw in one of the comments, was the right and conservatives are doing the exact same thing the Nazis did to Anne Frank. Just think about that. And granted, that's probably performative Twitter nonsense, but it's not, because that level of propaganda is being pushed. And if you get all of your information from those sources, are you ever willing to engage in a good faith discussion with a guy who writes under a supernova on Twitter? No, you believe I'm just some fascist bigot and I support the shutting down of everything gay, everything this, I hate everybody. It's not white people. It's horrible, this propaganda that we're all under, because the reality is, if we had all had a good faith discussion about what happened last week with Anne Frank, my guess is a lot of Americans would have said, oh, okay, I can understand why that school doesn't want that in a classroom, but we can't get there because Randy Weingarten and everyone like her doesn't want the left's base to get there. It's a death spiral. It really is.
As a mom of teenagers, as a Jew, and I don't usually like to say but I'm going to do it. Or it is Yom Kippur, even are we done yet? Yeah, I think the sun is down. It's not anymore. But if they knew, they might actually realize how offensive it is to her memory.
Exactly.
To have sexualized. This was a diary. She didn't expect to die. She didn't expect her diary to ever be read by anybody else ever, least of all millions upon millions of people. And her father, even when he sent it to be published, he removed any references to anything sexual, which were tame by comparison to the sexualization with the graphic novel. And there was embellishment. That graphic novel embellishes. It doesn't
Correct.
just graphic novelize her thoughts. It embellishes them. It sexualizes them way beyond her 13-year-old musings. Okay. I personally found it just disgusting. It's like spying on a teenage girl and then hypersexualizing what she said. And she's not here to protect herself or defend herself, nor is any member of her family. And instead of framing it that way and saying, how would you like it if this were your daughter's diary and she were murdered? How would you
Right.
like it if it was anybody that you knew and somebody decided to score political and social justice points, drawing a bunch of sexualized pictures to depict the very private thoughts of your child? And
Exactly.
that's where I come at it from. And then when you add to that, when they start throwing the Nazi thing at me, I'm like, don't even.
Call you a Nazi
Just
because you
shut
don't
up.
support this book in children's schools. It's insane. And just to drop a couple receipts here, so you don't think people like Deb and myself have lost your mind, although you probably don't if you're listening to this conversation. There is a full page picture of a young girl in a dress, and she's walking down it looks like a dream-like tunnel of flowers. There's some shadowy figure at the bottom. And the only print on the entire screen or page is, I must admit, every time I see a female nude, I go into ecstasy. If I only had a girlfriend. In another scene, she's walking by her family and her dad says, everything all right? Why the smile, Anne? Everything is lovely. Thanks for asking. But I had these feelings even before my period. I remember particularly one night when I spent the night at Jacques. Jacques, could we show each other our breasts? Why? As proof of our friendship? Absolutely not. If she had only known my terrible desire to kiss her. And she's got those insane, crazy leftist ideologue eyes in that photo. Now, again, are those actual lines from Anne Frank's diaries? Yes, they are. But is that the essence or the crux of that literature, those diaries, and why we share them all these decades later, her lusting over female breasts? Of course not. And yet that's what was drawn out, and that's what was enhanced and highlighted in that graphical novel. And by the way, that's why some school districts have said, wait a minute, why is this how we're teaching Anne Frank? Because is that doing, paying the right homage or showing the right respect to the story of Anne Frank? Is that why Anne's story is important, because she lust over some breasts? No, it's offensive as hell. And the other day, I had somebody who was a good faith interlocutor. I mean, this wasn't some troll, who had the audacity to drop on me in a Twitter exchange. They said, that graphical novel was approved by the Otto blah, blah, blah Foundation, which is, owned by the family. There's not a more authentic organization that could approve something like that. And mentioned her father like 3 times. And I'm like, dude, what do you know about her father? Because her father explicitly would not authorize all these passages of her diaries to be released, because he didn't want this to be the story of Anne Frank. He wanted the story that we actually teach in our schools. And prior to 1991, even the actual diaries, not graphical adaptations, the actual source text did not include these passages per the
That is correct.
of her
I've read the
father.
book multiple times, and those passages were not in the version that I read. And on top of that, the passages that were there were about Peter. Okay, so and there was more actual action, if you want to call it that, in the direction of anything resembling sex, with him, than in her little fantasy world about her girlfriend, or before she went into the annex.
Yeah, and you would
So
definitely not know that in the graphical adaptation.
you would not.
Needless to
They
say.
make it out like she's a closet homosexual, and like that she's a lesbian, as opposed to having little thoughts or whatever. And they completely leave out anything to do with Peter.
Right.
And this was a real live boy in the annex with her.
Right.
So
Exactly.
it's obviously slanted. It's obviously designed to serve a purpose, the purpose of the people who wrote it, the purpose of the people who are teaching it. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the Holocaust. It has nothing to do with teaching Anne Frank. It's exploiting her memory and exploiting her diary so they can hide behind the Holocaust
Of course.
when caught.
Of course.
That's what it is.
That politician in, I should have her name. I don't have it pulled up, but a politician, I believe she was in Baltimore, Maryland. She's got my brain's tired. It's been a long day. I woke up in Orlando today, but the Pinkster guy behind her, where all the gender ideology money's coming from. But she's got a picture of genderqueer, the actual book behind her. And she's taken to the podium to push a whole bunch of hate craft about, this is right at the height of, the conservatives are banning books, to push why the whole of society should think we're bigots and Nazis and fascists for wanting these books out. And the book that's right behind her is genderqueer. This is the same week Chelsea Clinton went on a national tour pushing the same thing. But the reason I'm bringing it up, Deb, is what does she start her whole speech with? A reference to the Holocaust, a reference to Jim Crow, a reference to slavery, whole bunch of weaponized empathy shit, and then builds it all up like a witch's brew into one spell and is like, boom, we need genderqueer in our schools. What? Like, what is the connection there? So you're right. It is a co-opting or a forced teaming, or what I like to say, using like a toy of these stories that are very important to us, that are historically important stories that we shouldn't let ideologues piss on and just use as their own tools like that. They do the same thing with the Black community. Black Lives Matter is now synonymous with queering children and gender spirits. I have no idea why, because the vast majority of Black Americans are not queer and they don't support gender spirits, but it's all just this mush together of, we're going to use all this emotion and this hysteria, and you're going to be forced to support our game plan, our agenda, which, by the way, is radical and batshit crazy, and the vast majority of Americans don't support. But we've got it all piggybacking on this greater cause, or this thing that we can't speak out against. So in the case of Anne Frank, you can't speak out against this, or else you don't want the Holocaust taught, right? You look at that African-American history course in Florida that our governor and our government down here vetoed. They vetoed it because it was designed by a radical ideologue in Temple University. And the whole course was filled with intersectionality, radical feminism, queer theory, gender theory, the typical leftist witches stew. And then they just titled the course African-American History. And that way, if you're against it, guess what? Florida hates Black people. Florida doesn't want to teach slavery. And I mean, Kamala Harris says that. Hillary Clinton says that. So you go back to that propaganda that makes it is a lie. And when they ultimately resubmitted it with all the leftist spells taken out, the course was approved. Because guess what? Most Black Americans don't want to be taught radical feminism and queer theory, particularly being told that's Black history. No, it's not. And it's offensive to the Black community when it gets used in that manner. Let's talk about one more example of this thick propaganda that is preventing us from having common sense discussion and logical scrutiny of policy that is needed, and is driving our whole country down a revolutionary path that isn't supported by 99% of our country. On April 13th, 2022, Emily Drabinski was nominated elected as the president of the American Library Association. Now, I won't get into the ALA, but the ALA is an important organization with a tremendous amount of influence in our society and in our schools and in our public libraries. When she wins, she gets on Twitter. This is her own words. She says, and I quote, "I just cannot believe that a Marxist lesbian who believes that collective power is possible to build and can be wielded for a better world is the president-elect of ALA Library. I am so excited for what we will do together. Solidarity." She broadcasts herself as a Marxist lesbian who wants to use collective power to see what we can do together in solidarity. I mean, she could have just written, "Yay, revolution," right? That is the president-elect of our American Library Association. In a sane world, that's the biggest news story of the evening. Across every channel, we're going, holy, you know what? Our American Library Association has been taken over by open and overt communists. Instead, it didn't even make news coverage. Only people like Deb Philman and Theo Jordan talked about it on Twitter, and then we were attacked for being bigots and fascist against our democracy for bringing it up. Fast forward a couple months, I think it was about 6 months, hardly anybody knew about this story because it got no mainstream press. And somehow that came up again. There was some sort of event that made this batshit crazy Emily person, reach the public surface again. NBC News runs a news story, but I would need to put that in air quotes, about what's going on. Oh, that's right. 3 states announced they were going to separate themselves from the American Library Association. We're not going to allow any more state funds to go into your institution, and we're not going to follow your guidance anymore. Why? Because you're now led by an open communist. Okay. So the news coverage from NBC News on that exact story, and I'm not exaggerating any of that to prove my point here. I've cut the headline off in the thing I put up, but it was, several states move away from American Library Association, many of which have LGBTQ and racial themes, is part of the reason for the library exodus. Shows a picture of three people sitting, and in front of them is a sign. It says fascism equals censorship, oppression of opposition. So our news outlet had the audacity to tell America, the brainwashed half that doesn't have a clue what they're supporting anymore, that a bunch of fascists and bigots and white supremacists in Texas and Florida and a couple other schools were going crazy fascist oppressive because they hate gay people and they don't want books in schools anymore. They want to dumb down all those white kids and make them horrible white supremacist fascists. But Deb, what was the real story here? The real story here was 6 months ago when an open Marxist takeover occurred at the ALA. Why didn't that get news coverage? Why are we 6 months later talking about this in the inverse? I mean, Joseph Goebbels would be proud, man. The level of propaganda that we are under at a population level in America astounds me. It puts my jaw on the floor every day, and I write about this stuff every day, and I have been for 3 years. I'm still shocked 3 years later, Deb. I mean, it's that.
I like to believe there. I always think every day, this must be it. This has to be the last thing that's going to shock me. And then the next day comes and something else. Do you follow Dan Kleinman? Do you follow Dan?
I don't.
He's the founder of the world. He's the founder of the WLA. It's a new World Library Association. They are seeking to replace the ALA, and they've had some of these states and libraries within those states join them after leaving the ALA. He's been writing for decades about the ALA and its descent into communism. He's been a watchdog on this. He has a site, I think it's safelibraries.org or something. I'll find it. But he is the go-to guy on all of this stuff. So he's been writing about it. But even he gets sort of, shadow banned, censored, blocked. He has to use all kinds of aliases to go in and listen to what they're talking about in their webinars. I've created a little fake account so I can keep tabs on the School Library Association and the ALA and watch some of their webinars. And I have one sitting in my pile of stuff that I am trying to make shows about. I watched one. I was like, oh my God. It's from a couple weeks ago where they're sitting around talking about how they're going to strategize against us. So they're not even shy.
Not to interrupt you, but I saw some of that from Karlin Bashenko's work a couple weeks ago. She actually got a live recording inside one of those, and oh my God, Deb, like you said,
that's the socialist. That was an actual socialist meeting. So we wouldn't be surprised by an actual socialist meeting. But when it's librarians getting together at the ALA and they're sitting around having a lesson talking about how they're going to protect people from lawsuits and how they're going to hide things and how they're going to, deal with the parents and people coming to challenge books and, oh, woe is us, we're such victims, and how do you cope with the stress? Oh, well, here's how I cope. I mean, I've got to cut some clips and make a show out of it because it's unbelievable to listen to them play victim and act like they're so put upon and they're the guardians of liberty. They're the guardians of freedom when they're led by an open Marxist and they aren't even apologetic about it, but they're the guardians of freedom.
I know, it's crazy. I mean, if it were a script for the Twilight Zone, it would be rejected because it's just too unbelievable. And that goes back to that Glendale, California story that I told, because at the same time that was happening, and you're aware of this too.
Well, Ray Shelton was on a couple times. He was the teacher, the gay teacher who helped the parents and stood up with them. And then they called him a Nazi.
Yeah, exactly. If you remember on that same week, they had the protests in Maryland. Asra Nomani, who's been a warrior for us on this front, she did all that reporting from there. And in my opinion, that was when the Truman Show House of Cards started to really crumble because we were still under system-wide propaganda that the only people who are against these initiatives, every damn initiative we've talked about in this conversation, Deb, importantly, if you're against any of these, you fall into these, ramrodded buckets of points. Exactly. Right. And so we're still
Karens with the side part, right?
Exactly.
So I'm literally, people come at me sometimes, they'll look at a video and they might agree with us, right? But they'll see a video and they'll watch and say, oh, phew, I thought I was going to be watching some Karen, side part Karen ranting about this stuff again. I'm really so thrilled that you'd be, and I'm thinking, I'm not changing my hairstyle just because leftists have painted people like me to be like the Antichrist or something. I mean, I've had this hair and it's not even blonde, it's gray, but that this is what they say. It's so I actually have a hard time because I have this face, and unless I were
You are the
completely
Karen mold.
anonymous, yeah, I can't help it. That's why,
That's too funny.
I'm like, it doesn't
But you
even
know,
count
this,
that I am Jewish.
yeah,
It's like, that
exactly.
doesn't even count.
Only certain lived experiences matter, Deb, in this time and age. But you know,
No, because that's whiteness.
yeah, exactly. The morality binary, the term I love to use, this whole propaganda approach of if you don't agree with us, you are automatically into these one buckets of abhorrence, really started to collapse at that
Right.
same time because those visuals were so striking. They were so profound. Because again, on one side of the street, just all white, rabid, wild looking rainbow guard. They all look childless. They all look largely off the same assembly line because they are. And on the other side of the street are dads, moms, grandparents. They look like they just came from work, young, old, barely a white person in the whole group. And yet that night, we're supposed to believe they're white supremacists. Some DNC official in Maryland even took a podium and said that, they're not exactly white supremacists, but they're adjacent to. And so it's largely started to collapse. And if we weren't under this Iron Truman Show grip of propaganda, it would collapse. More importantly, we would have never got here in the first place. One of the things that makes my blood boil, if you think about this, earlier this year, in the early parts of 2023, we were unable anywhere on social media to stand up to any of this stuff. I couldn't even call a man a man. If I called Rachel Levine a guy, I got banned. It wasn't until Elon changed that about 6 months ago that we could even speak the other side, much less argue the other side. See, they can call us Nazis and homophobes and transphobes and all these horrible names, but I couldn't even present my case. So that is the very definition of the term we all know all too well now, manufactured false consensus. And that's how we got here. Most Americans don't believe cutting off healthy breasts is euphoria. But when that's on every magazine cover and on the Today Show and on Oprah and on every news outlet, when Oprah says it must be, right? And when the only people who are saying otherwise are bigots and transphobes and racists and white supremacists, it's this marching the herd down this path of you will only believe in us. And it's getting worse and worse. We could take the same discussion outside of the context of schools and we'd see the same dynamic, the same engine firing over there.
That's right.
One thing I wanted to mention when we were talking about those libraries, you and I talked about that thread, that article from Slate about that gentleman who I had a lot of respect for, who dove into that book. It's perfectly normal.
It was like reading him going through a struggle session, though.
It absolutely was. It was almost a one-person struggle session, though. He kind of struggled himself in the article.
He did. He was so desperate to hold on to his disclaimers. It was
and I think at the end, he actually lost his own struggle session. He wrote what I thought was a great article. I even went as far as to refer to him as, and I quote, a man of integrity in the thread that I wrote about him. But this man of integrity just crumbled and caved to his own struggle session in his own article by the end. But what I wanted to mention in there was these two passages. So for anybody who has no idea what we're talking about, there was an article written by Slate, which Deb just pulled up here.
It's up. Yeah, it's right here. Yeah.
Ayman Ishmael, who I, again, really appreciated he wrote this. See, the very brief cliff notes are that he had heard It's Perfectly Normal was, a bad book. It was one of the right-wing boogeyman books being banned in schools. And he kind of thought it was a nothing burger. It was being manufactured as a right-wing, hysteria thing. So he went to a library to check it out, read it, and then wrote this article with this feedback. And it was very genuine. It was very honest. I'd encourage you to go and read the article. But I want to read these two paragraphs real quick. So he has a hard time getting this book. Light bulb.
That's the funny part. That is the funny part.
He calls around and there's like a copy at this book at this branch, but not in this branch. And there's like a challenge in finding the book. Follow this. Ready? This is from the article. Hold on.
Let me find it. Where is this
is
what he said.
Okay, this is perfect. So he says, do you have It's Perfectly Normal by Robbie Harris? I asked. The librarian checked her computer. Her eyes widened when she recognized the cover. Do we have this book? She asked another librarian. She joined her at the terminal. What is it? A sex ed book for kids? She asked. I've seen this one before. It's like really, really detailed, she answered with a nervous smile, like very graphic. The senior librarian took a closer look. Is this one of the ones that's being banned? She asked. Yeah, that's pretty much exactly why I wanted to check it out, I told her. Well, there's 2 copies available at the other branch. We can order it and place it on hold for you. Now get this, man. But I wouldn't get my hand on Newark's copy of It's Perfectly Normal. When I returned a week later to pick it up, the librarian told me the copies listed as available had vanished. They weren't checked out, but they weren't on the shelves either. Instead, one of the librarians offered to check out the book herself from her own local library and lent it to me. So here is an author, presumably from the left because he writes for Slate, who decided to do a research project. I admire the guy for even being willing to dive through the thick clouds of hatecraft propaganda that told him the only reason he'd read this book is to confirm the ruminations of all these radical fascists and white supremacists. He finally decides, you know what, I'm going to go find out for myself. This is what journalism's supposed to be, guys. That's why I gave this guy so much praise. He goes to finally get the book, and he can't even get it. He ends up getting it from a friend who worked at a library, who had to check it out herself. I mean, holy shit, does that cast some 5-alarm fire sirens at the rest of society of, guys, there is such a concerted effort to prevent this ideology, these toxins from getting sunlight, that even when you want to go check out one of these books, you can't get your hands on it. That reminds me of some of these parents who have showed up to school board meetings and read passages which were books from their own kids' schools, and they had their mics turned off because the old stuffy people up at the front of the school board said that, sir, that's not appropriate. That's not appropriate to be read in this room. Excuse me, it's not appropriate for your virgin ears up there, but it's appropriate for my 12-year-olds? I mean, it's crazy. And I just thought that part of his story spoke volumes.
He says that right here. He says, he talks about this whole paragraph. He says, it's perfectly normal. It's harder to shrug away. It's not difficult to see why this book has been an effective cudgel, both in recent years and practically since it was published. Its images are particularly blunt and graphic. That articles and social media posts about parents' concerns over those cartoons have often blurred them out serves to prove their point. Earlier this year, a pastor in Asheville, North Carolina, made headlines after his mic was cut off during a school board meeting. If you don't want to hear it in a school board meeting, why should children be able to check it out of the school system?
Isn't that crazy? And that's happened numerous times. In my thread, by the way, I dug a little further and I was giving some advice to others who are trying to crack the code. One of the most important things you can do when you see this batshit crazy stuff that is ideology being packaged and ramrodded in the flavors of positivity, it's these radical changes that we're supposed to just inherently think are righteous and not question them. They're always teamed up with experts, nonprofits and stuff, right? One of the most important things you can do is drill down into that. Because in order to have any credibility left, and there ain't a lot remaining, but they've got to have some, or nobody will even tune those channels on anymore. You've got to show your work. You got to show your receipts. So for example, I did this, and not to sidetrack us here, but I did this with that bizarre fat liberation campaign from Dove Soap. Oh my God, was that crazy? But if you go into their website and you look at their new fat liberation campaign, you'll see that they teamed up with a couple nonprofits that they call experts on why they're doing all this. And if you drill down into them, you find the same leftist revolution we find everywhere. So going back to that thread that I wrote that was about that article, I said the author spoke
right here.
Yeah, right there. The author spoke with one of these sex ed pros. He talks about sex ed pros or experts. And as you see, as Deb's flashing down there, when you dig into that, you run into Melissa Pintor Carnegie. Melissa Pintor Carnegie runs sex positive families. And when you start to drill into,
I don't even want to show the pictures, but where is she? Here she is.
Yeah, right there. So there's Melissa Carnegie. If you go dig down into it, she's of course a she, they, of course she is, founded this organization in 2017, and you start to drill down into what it's all about. And you see what type of organization or what type of events does that individual put on? What is ultimately her framework she's pushing? That's the most important thing every listener to this conversation can do, is recognize that none of these topics or these issues exist in a vacuum. They are tentacles of the same revolutionary beast. And so when you drill down into the fat liberation campaign from Dove, when you drill down into the Dylan McGovney, whatever campaign at Bud Light, when you drill into this Carnegie lady and her sex positive families, you will find the same assembly line ideology everywhere. Guess what the NGO related to Dove's fat liberation campaign led her whole website off with? A 2-paragraph hysterical presentation of George Floyd. What does George Floyd and Black Lives Matter have to do with fat liberation, much less Dove soap? Nothing. My point in this whole ramble is if you dig down into Melissa Carnegie and her organizations, you will find that she, they is involved in exactly what you think she is. So that's why that book is showing up in our schools. That's why the Anne Frank story is now being told through the lens of lusting over female breasts. It's ultimately the same inversion, the same dismantling apparatus. It's ultimately anti-capitalist revolution. And that's dots that a lot of people are having a hard time connecting, is how is queering elementary children related to destroying capitalism? But they are. They're the same thing, all capital letters.
Well, there's something even more sinister going on as well, So yes, we talk about it's against capitalism and it's against, they don't like the American experiment, all that, but they have a fundamentally different view of humankind. And Christine Jones and I talked about this in the two shows that I put up this week. Their entire worldview, their entire ontology is fundamentally different than most parents. So look at what you have here, this language. That makes me uncomfortable. Well, why might that be? Our triggers we must unlearn. Now, why would we do that? So it's all, there are other things they're trying to teach our kids to either unlearn or to learn something to replace what they might learn at home so they can view themselves, their bodies, their role on the planet, their role in life, their inner life, their outer life, like all of it fundamentally differently so that they can see their purpose on this planet as being to serve the collective.
Absolutely.
They can make themselves into a god, but they're only a god in their own little private Idaho, their own pseudo reality. Other than that, they have to serve the needs of the collective. Their corporeal self has to serve everybody else. But if they want to go up inside their head or believe whatever fantasy they want to believe, that's fine, provided it's in line with what the collective says is okay today, this week, next year, whatever they feel like. They could change, they can move the goalposts whenever they feel like it. And that'll be okay because they serve the collective. So
very well said.
It's the Borg.
It is
the Matrix.
And what you just talked about, you use the perfect term, the collective, or you can talk about it as utopia. A lot of people get thrown off with the term communism or even Marxism. In fact, if you've noticed in the last maybe 3 to 4 weeks, we're now getting bogged down in irrelevant discourse about nomenclature. Yasha Monk just has put out several pieces of, well, this isn't actually Marxism. It's not really Marxism. It's identity Marxism, but no true Marxism has been tried. And, it's a similar circular dance that we did of CRT is not in schools. Oh, that's actually just a law school level course.
It's hard to try something that didn't have an instruction manual. Okay, people keep forgetting, like Marxism doesn't know how. And it doesn't people well either. It's a treatise on what I wish would be
right, and it totally,
in terms of outcome. How we get there, I don't know.
Absolutely, and we just landed on the critical word of what the whole revolution is fueled on or is driven towards, and that's equity. The idea of instead of equalizing everybody at the plate, giving them the same equipment to try to swing and hit the ball, we're going to go to the end result and make sure everybody hit the triple. Well, you just can't do that. This type of collective or utopia ideology, it just dismisses the way of man, the ways of nature, damn near everything about humankind for this very faith-like idea of the utopia or the collective. Not to sidetrack, but there was an absolutely phenomenal article written by Matt Osborne. If anybody listening to this does not follow Matt, I'd highly encourage you to. He's part of Natasha Chart's outlet, The Distance Magazine. Their outlet is thedistancemag.com. Matt Osborne wrote an article back on February 2nd of this year, and it's Gender Identity is a New Gnostic Gospel. Not quite a religion, but glomming on to yours. He traces back through history how this is exactly what you just said, Deb. It is a spiritual, very cult-like movement. It's the idea of a spirit or a pure or a better me existing outside of the physical me. And that's largely why, and that all drives us to this idea of the utopia, the collective, the oppressive structures, how we get rid of them. We all somehow, over enough bong hits in a college dorm, we land in this place where we all get to do art. Everybody's needs are met. I mean, it's just the most juvenile, batshit crazy thinking ever. But Matt's point in that article is this isn't really something new. History rhymes, and we're just dealing with a new reverberation of the same type of cult-like thing. And the reality is, not to get religious here, and I'm a lifelong non-believer as a side note, but it is not coincidental that leftists are almost entirely atheist and usually militantly atheist because the God-sized hole is being replaced with something else. And again, I say that to you as an atheist myself. I'm not here preaching to anybody, but I think the history of mankind has shown pretty concretely at this point that humans will either develop faith-based religion doctrine or they will fill it with something likely even crazier. And in my opinion, that's where we are right now. And that's why I spend so much time talking online about the tenets of Christianity, and in fact spend so much time around the church, even though I don't attach to any of the scripture myself. I truly believe we're living through something historic, Deb. I don't think most people—
without a doubt. Yeah, we're living through a disintegration. Have you ever read The Dim Hypothesis?
I have not.
It's by Leonard Peikoff. I would recommend it. He hypothesizes that there are sort of phases. Some people call them turnings, whatever. But and there's integration, misintegration, and disintegration, basically. And we're in a disintegration phase at this point. Now, the good news is that you'll then have an integration phase after it. The question is, nobody knows how long the disintegration will last and what the integration, like what will bring it about. It could last. I mean, look at the Dark Ages lasted a long time.
Yeah.
So, but the point is that this is just, I don't mean to minimize it. And I think we could actually, I think he wrote the book hoping that we could sort of stop it from happening, like that, we have the capacity to stop going through these phases as violently as we have in the past. Not to say that we can't prevent elements of them from taking hold here and there, but they don't necessarily need to result in mass death.
Yeah, I agree.
And lengthy periods of illiteracy and short lifespans and things like that. So, but I think it's instructive to think about what happens in cycles of progress and what happens to people when they get sort of enamored of progress for its own sake, and they forget that the natural state of man is naked poverty,
Right.
And that it takes human ingenuity and effort and reason to actually act upon the environment to make survivability like more likely for longer and all those things. And when you have people like Dewey and the progressives and everybody that created our education system wanting to go backwards to where we're essentially apes, trousered apes, as Christine calls them, because then we're going to be easier to, I guess, corral into the little labor force of the 21st century, or force us to eat the bugs they want us to eat, or get us to buy the products they want us to buy, or whatever the ultimate goal of the people pulling the strings at the top, the elite, the people in control,
Of course, it's a power play.
PhDs, the power play, whatever it is. But they need to, this is not a word, but I'm going to say it anyway, primitivize us. They need to get us to be more tribal, more like led by our emotions, because if you can get people to live in their emotions, you can manipulate them very, very easily.
Well said.
And when you can manipulate them very easily, then you can control them.
Yep. And a critical element to that approach is elevating the subjective over the objective. Why do you think we see 2 + 2 = 5 all over the place?
Right.
Why was Kareem Carr given a mathematics award by Popular Science for the theory of 2 + 2 = 5? It's a forced social engineering of the subjective over the objective, because boy, once we believe that a man becomes a woman on thought alone, then objectivity is out the window and we can now do anything we want. We can almost start working towards building a collective. One point I wanted to drill down on here, if you don't mind, Deb, because I think it's in my opinion,
Can I interrupt you really quick?
Yes, ma'am. Of course.
To the audience, I'm going to go off screen and use my image avatar and kill my mic so that I can break my fast and not pass out from hunger.
Yeah, I was taunting her with a ginormous
Theo's going to tell
the
story. Theo's going to tell a story. I'm going to be here listening, not speaking, because I'm going to be chewing. And I'm pretty sure you guys don't want to hear that or see that. So
yes. Enjoy the cheese and nuts. I was taunting her with the giant Jimmy John's before we started recording. So
thank you. So take it away, Theo.
All right, I appreciate it. So one of the things that I've written a lot about, and in my opinion, we do not get out of this quagmire until we force it down this framing. And I know that sounds a bit arrogant or condescending, like I know the only way out. I don't mean it that way, but I've spent a lot of time analyzing this chessboard. And in my opinion, we're not cracking this code without the key I'm about to describe. And the key that I'm about to describe is we have to compare and contrast, set directly on the table, this leftist push, the collective ideology or this utopia ideology. See, I don't want to use the terms critical race theory or gender theory or anti-colonialism, because all of those pigeonhole our own brains. They attack this too narrow. They fail to recognize these are tentacles of a greater beast. And in my mind right now, I'm drifting back towards James Lindsay's amazing speech where he laid out how identity Marxism has evolved from the old turn the workers against the elite, because capitalism ended up actually making the middle class do quite well. So the whole narrative proved to be bullshit. The snake oil presentation didn't work anymore. And so this attack simply rebranded itself, reflavored itself into identity categories, everything from sex categories and queer to whiteness and all of that. But anyhow, I got a bit off track. Let's bring this back to America. In order to address this all, we have to first start by addressing our demographics. We are a Christian country, a Christian nation. I know that terminology ruffles the feathers out of tons of people, and that's fine. I don't care anymore. We've got to stop worrying about hurting people's feelings at the detriment of not speaking truth, and as a result, not having logical and sensical conversations we so desperately need to have. The reality is this: our country was founded by largely Christians. We were founded under the tenets that derive from those scriptures. It doesn't mean that all Americans pray to the Bible. It means that a lot of our structures and our pillars were built from that tool set. In addition, to this date, we are a majority Christian populace. And I don't mean a majority, like if you take a pizza of America and chop out the chunk that are religious, a majority of those slices are Christian. No. Of the entire pie. Last I saw, it was hovering around 55%. I wouldn't be surprised if it's grown even more than that in the last 3 years. The largest growing enrollment demographic in Catholic schools right now are non-Catholics. Chew on that for a minute, because it's one of the only environments, school environments, where parents can be assured that a lot of this leftist revolutionary garbage, in my opinion, or ideologies are not being force-fed down their children's throats. The point being, we still to this day are a majority Christian nation. And in addition, if you add in other religions like Islam into this pie, what is left on the non-believing slice is a very small slice. So where am I going with all this? Am I preaching here? Am I proselytizing Christianity? Not at all. And in fact, if you go to my Substack, theojordan.substack.com, I wrote a piece on there called Scripture from an Atheist. And it was exactly these type of thoughts. And the atheist speaking is me. I've spent my entire life as a non-believer, growing up in a heavily religious and largely Christian country in a very largely Christian area. And I was made to feel bad for my views my whole life. One day I'd find God, everybody who mattered to me in life told me. And of course, that's sort of a demeaning thing, but I share all of that because I want people to understand that I'm not coming at this from an angle of trying to convert people to Christianity. I don't consider myself a Christian, myself. In that article, I refer to a piece of Christian scripture that simply says God created everyone in his image. God created males and females in his image. And what that ultimately means, one of the overriding doctors of Christianity, is that we were all made in the image of God. We were made in the image of his perfection, meaning we are perfect the way we are. And that scripture teaches people to learn to love and be happy with who they are. Compare and contrast that to the basic fundamentals or the fundamental premises or tenets or pillars of the ideology of gender theory, of gender ideology, this Gnostic dogma that tells us we are, and I quote, only assigned male, female at birth, that there is a greater you that exists outside of the material you. And with the right ideologues whispering in your ear, you too can change from a boy to a girl. We are now forced to praise this as pride, to cheer it on and clap for it and scream for the parades of the young girls who have cut their healthy breasts off because they've now found their true self. Time magazine put the Elliot Page version of Ellen Page, looking absolutely miserable, on the front of their magazine with the headline, "I'm finally who I am," or "I'm finally the real me." The real me. Think of how different that line is from God created you in the image of his perfection. That now, so where I went in that article is one of two things must be true. Either God created children in the image of his perfection, or God messed up really bad and created tens of thousands of children who were, another quote, born in the wrong body. God messed up so bad that a boy was placed into a female body or vice versa. And the way we correct that, the way we get to the proper landing place, the way we find the real you is through gender affirming care. What interesting language those three words are together. That's actually chemical blocking of puberty, chemical castration and sterilization, and ultimately surgical procedures to remove healthy limbs. Oh my goodness, does that contradict with the tenets of Christianity that tell us, or tell those who believe, that all children were created exactly how they were meant to be. So why am I sharing all this? I'm sharing all of this because, in my opinion, we will not push this leftist revolutionary energy out of our schools until a critical mass of Americans force this discussion to go into the religious views sausage grinder. This has to be something that gets treated under the Constitution as the state indoctrination of religious views. And the last point I want to make on this rant is, and I have referenced these pictures probably more than anything else on Twitter in the last 2 years, because this topic means more to me than any other topic, because I have 2 kids of my own. And in fact, my daughter was a tomboy for most of her life, which we loved. We thought it was great. She played with robots and dinosaurs instead of princes in pink dresses. But boy, she would have been the ideal canvas for one of these ideologues to get in their ear. And in fact, I found out one of them did when she was in 2nd grade. And that's one of those logs that helps burn my fire. But anyhow, we all agree that in the public school setting, we would not allow a classroom door, picture a door wrap, walking into a kindergarten, a 3rd grade, a 5th grade, whatever, classroom. Those are other people's children walking into an adult's classroom in the public school setting. We would not allow that door to have that piece of scripture that I just used a minute ago. You are all created in the image of God. You are created in the image of his perfection. You are all children of Jesus. Reasons why Jesus is great and God is good. We wouldn't allow that on the door. I would fight against that, even though I happen to think the teachings of Jesus are positive for children, because it's not your children. It's not your right to indoctrinate children with your own dogma, with your own worldview. And I recognize those words may make the religious chafe or be offended. How dare you call God dogma? But the reality is, it is to you. I don't believe in your scripture, right? And how dare you think you have the right to push the teachings of Jesus onto my child? The point of this all is we've all agreed to that. And we did a long time ago. We send our children to learn math and arithmetic and reading, not to be proselytized and preached upon by people who are thumping Bibles. So now let me read you the door wrappings of 2 public school doors in America. Here is one. It's got a giant sticker that says they, them. And the name of the teacher is Mix Kochenspager. Mix is spelled MX. So this teacher is not a Mr. This teacher is not a Mrs. This teacher is a mix. And it says, Mix Kotchenberger is non-binary. That means they, underlined, do not feel like a girl or a boy. So instead of she and her, you use they and them. For example, Mix sounds like mix. She's got in parentheses. Kotchenberger is strange. They always have weird earrings, and their voice is so silly when they read. I like them. Okay, that's one classroom door as you walk in a public school teacher or classroom. Here's another one. And it's called, this was this crazy batshit leftist, of course, septum ring, colored hair, exactly like you'd think she would look, who did this video. It's bone chilling to me that these ideologue educators broadcast this stuff themselves. They're so empowered and so emboldened. They push these videos out themselves on TikTok. Imagine how many of these ideologues we have in classrooms who aren't so emboldened that they're advertising it online. It's a chilling thought. It's truly a tip of the iceberg situation. But she puts out this video where she's all about, oh, these anchor charts in my room, and these anchor charts are great. Let me show you this one anchor chart. Now I'm reading it verbatim. My name is Mix. Here we go again. Cogsdill, MX. My pronouns are Z, that's XE, Zem, XEM, Zer, XIR, and Zers, XIRS. How to refer to Mix Cogdill. Mix C is my teacher. Z is multilingual. Students practice and speak Spanish with Zem, X. Zer, XIR, hobby is learning languages. So let's just stop the record, turn off the music, put the lights on for a second. Everybody, STFU, put all the emotion aside and ask ourselves, what in the world is going on here? We just said, we all agree, we wouldn't allow a door to say you were made in the image of perfection by God, right? But we're going to allow teachers to tell young children, so young they don't even fully understand the world, that their name is mixed cogdill and their pronouns are z, zim, zer, and zers. Obviously, that lesson or that introduction can't just stand alone, right? You can't just stand up in front of a classroom and say, my name is mixed cogdill and I'm z, zer, zim. Nobody has any idea what you're talking about. You sound like an alien. So inherently, you're going to have to explain to the children why you're mixed. And how do you do that? You explain to them that you're not a boy or girl, that you can't do it any other way. You have to explain to them that humans actually aren't born male or girl, i.e., everything you've been told about God creating you perfect is not true. You are actually just assigned that, and there is a greater you. Now we're starting to drift off into that Gnostic vein again, right? There is this greater spiritual you that you can find, you can pursue, you can get gender-affirming care that'll one day be there. Oh, and by the way, you'll get treated extra special. You get to have pride parties with cupcakes and music and rainbows and dancing. Everything's great. You don't want to be the straight, white, cis, heteronormative oppressor. So I'm exaggerating all of this to some extent to drive a point home, but nothing that I just said was made up or artificial or over-exaggerated to the point that it didn't present this fact pattern in good faith. How have we reached a point where we can't have the teachings of Jesus on the door, but we can have this batshit crazy doctrine or scripture or ideology from mixed cocktail Z-Zer-Zim? And that's what my article is all about. This is scripture from militant atheists. And my last point, and I hear you're back, so I'll stop my rant. My last point is that we have to really stop and focus, and I won't make this long-winded, Deb, but stop and focus on what this idea of queering is really about. And it's going back to that speech I just gave of James Lindsay, but I'm not going to get off on that page again. The point is that queering no longer even has anything to do with sexuality. In fact, you can now claim the identity category of asexual, which means you're not attracted to anything. There's an avatar for that. There's a gray, white, and purple flag. You can wear the flag, everything. If you claim asexual, 11-year-old girl, then you're no longer the dreaded cis white heteronormative oppressor. And in fact, one of my followers will remain nameless here. I guess I'm actually his follower. I followed him before he knew who I was. He had a family member who in their journal at 11-year-old had written some stick figures showing this propaganda hitting her off of a computer, had the saddest eyes you could ever imagine an 11-year-old girl could write for a stick figure cartoon, but you could see what was happening to them. Then their next page, they had this wacky looking anime avatar they had built for themselves, and it was asexual. It had the perfectly colored flag, of course, and on the top it said, "I'm asexual, boy." That was the avatar that this child had been coerced or forced to adopt. And I'm not making this up, Deb. In the final page of her diary, she had suicidal thoughts because, and I quote, her friends had told her she wasn't queer enough. So our children are under such immense pressure in this environment to adopt one of these ideologies. And then once one of these ideologies gets adopted, the school, through what we've talked about in this whole conversation with that New York Department of Education guidance, that seeding out, that proactive instead of reactive approach, the school gets their hooks into them, these guidance counselors, and they now then drive them in that direction. No, you're not actually a girl. You're a Z-Zer, just like mixed cogdale. And before you know it, you've driven the wedge between family, the pillars and foundations of community and church that have made that family who they are. You've taken that child out of it. You're now driving them into this other identity, which, by the way, is antithetical to the identity that has existed in that household their entire life. They're mutually exclusive. They cannot exist together. And man, they're meant to be that way. This goes right back to that incredible thread by Josh Dawes, where he broke down this whole engine and method of attack and what it's designed to do. And it's not any more complex than I'm explaining. You shame and demoralize the children with this anti-racist critical race theory doctrine, with this sexuality stuff, with making it seem like being straight is wrong. You beat them down. You make them want a way out. Then you have a presentation in your school cafeteria of all the different flags and avatars they can adopt. And if they do one, they get to go have cupcakes and songs and music in the gym. I mean, it's horrifying what's happening. And I guess the reason I wanted to share that so much is when you lay it on the table next to the tenets of Christianity, when you factor in that we are a majority Christian people, you have to ask yourself, what is going on when this radical revolutionary dogma is being mandated by state force? I mean, in California, that's now law. In Washington and Oregon and California and New York, they're passing law that allows in essence, state-sanctioned kidnapping if families aren't willing to adopt and bring this dogma into their household. It goes back to that comment the person made to me on Twitter about the Muslims in Glendale. Well, that home may not accept them. So what? What right is it of the state to inject or interject into that home and raise our children in their vision, particularly when their vision is now mixed cocktail, who's a Z's or a Zim? I mean, it's crazy. I get red in the face talking about this stuff, Deb, because it's a topic that is of such paramount importance.
No, I'm right there with you. And you were talking about, the indoctrination. And I think what might, I don't know if this will help or hurt, but you've probably seen this. Did you see this little video? This is at a school in Ireland. Ireland is a fairly Catholic country, at least in this part of Ireland, in Limerick, where this is. This school. They made this video. The school did, and this is one of several. This is just one of several that they made. So I'm gonna play it. I hope that the sound is gonna work. Because I did turn on a different mic, but y'all let me know in the comments if you can't hear it. But this is I think it's Villiers School. I think it's how you pronounce it. This is about cultural appropriation.
I've got sound.
Oh, gee, you got your braids and I love them.
Yeah, thanks.
I want to get them for longitude. I think they're so exotic.
You shouldn't. My culture isn't an accessory.
What do you mean? I've never tried them before. I want to get them.
Yeah, I know, but this is for my culture, not for your fashion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have known, but I had to learn.
I should have known, but I had to learn.
I should have known, but I had
to learn. Why cannot wear your braids if I'm white? Because that is cultural appropriation.
Cultural appropriation is the act of taking or using things from a culture that is not your own, especially without showing that you understand or respect this culture.
Tell me this, would Leah wear braids in a job interview or in a formal situation?
She only wants braids because they're exotic.
She will not wear them for an everyday purpose.
For Grace, it is more of a costume for the concert, but for Shalom, it is part of her culture and who she identifies as.
People like Grace can pick and choose what she takes from Black culture, as others cannot. Like Shalom, it's a protective hairstyle.
Sadly, cultural appropriation has been normalized nowadays, and many people from different cultures experience it.
So please appreciate and respect other cultures without disrespecting them. This video is made by People of Color Alliance Villiers. Thank you for watching.
Wow.
Look at their
jaw-dropping.
Look at the logo.
Communist fist, baby.
Okay, so I have things, if I may, I have a couple things I want to say about it, and then you can dive in. Okay, first of all, they made statements as if they're fact that are not. For example, the first claim is that it's Black culture to have braids. That is horseshit. Excuse my language, but braids have been worn since, forever. Ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the Vikings wore braids. Ancient Europeans wore braids. This is nonsense, okay? Secondly, the claim that the girl would not wear them to a job interview, would not wear them on a daily basis, would not wear them to a formal occasion. She only wanted to wear them to a concert. Well, maybe she wanted to wear them for a concert to look cool because she thinks they are pretty. But who are they to say that she wouldn't decide, I think I want to wear them other places. I want to wear them to a job interview. That's absurd. The third claim that the girl, Shalom, or whatever her name was, she doesn't have a choice which things to take from her culture. Hogwash. Excuse me, Beyonce, could you stop wearing little Indian girls' hair that you buy, your extensions, your weave? Could you not do that? Because that's cultural appropriation from my hair. This is ridiculous. Are they driving cars? Are they wearing clothes? They're going to school in Ireland.
Yeah. The creepiest part of that video was the chanting part where through we must see and identify. Crazy.
It is unbelievably ridiculous. And that, as I said, is just one of this is at their school. This is what they have. Black Lives Matter. The progress flag. They have this stand-up awareness week. Villiers School celebrates LGBT, QI, whatever. This is more of their stuff. This
That's
is
insane.
more. This is all at this school.
James
Then we
Lindsay
have-
refers to this as an occupying force. And when you see the flags pop up like that, Black Lives Matter with the communist fist. And by the way, the communist fist is the same as the BLM fist. It's the same as the equity fist. It's the same as the queer plus fist. It's the same fist, guys. When you see that pop up everywhere, occupying force. James is absolutely right. We see it on naval ships.
They blocked this individual, whoever set it up to begin with. There were other, I believe there were some other videos, but now I can't find them. I don't know where they went. They made other videos. Like that was just one. That was just the cultural appropriation one. But I think they had more beyond that.
Can you imagine sending
I
your
had to
kid
show you
that?
guys that. Now that's in Ireland, but I want people watching this in the United States to understand that this is happening. Even in homeschooling. Okay, so I'm pushing everybody to go to homeschool and do homeschooling, whatever. So my 15-year-old daughter is homeschooled. We are in a co-op that she goes to on Fridays. Last Friday, their activity for the co-op was to go to a place called Rural Hill, and they had a presentation by Native Americans about Native American culture, whatever. This was at the co-op. And pick the activity. They have different activities every week. This is the one that somebody decided to do. Pick her up. She says, well, that was great. And I'm like, well, what? She said, they talked about cultural appropriation the entire time.
Great.
And again, about the hairstyle. You can't. The woman speaking said, if you use the term Indian, it's like the N word for Black people.
These people are such psychopaths. The reality is the entire doctrine.
It's even a homeschool co-op going to this activity here locally in North
it.
Carolina. You can't escape every
They
place you go.
They just added a new badge requirement for Eagle Scouts. It's not the actual name, but it's like an anti-racist leftist revolution badge that all Eagle Scouts now have to do. Interestingly, unlike, and I'm not much of a Boy Scout. I was actually one when I was very young, but I don't know all that much about scouting. I've just read a lot about this particular story. But what's interesting about it is it does not have the strict the guide or the counselor's manual that walks through all the other badges. This one is left open-ended. How about that? Now, a gentleman I follow who's actually really into the Scouts himself, he actually told me he thinks that's a good thing because it will allow the Scout leaders to sort of circumvent it if they don't want to, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's left open-ended so they can drill this crazy revolutionary dog shit into children through that vehicle as well. But again, it's like you can't escape it anywhere. What is it doing in Eagle Scouts? Very quickly on cultural appropriation, and I won't sidetrack because it's not really what we're talking about tonight, but few things rile me up as much as that dog shit scripture of a cultural appropriation. If you think about the very basics of America, we were created as a quilt of the world. We are there literally is no American, right? You think of what's a Chinese person, a Mexican person, a Korean person.
We're all culturally appropriating. That's what cultural appropriation. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Right,
and like I said, these kids are wearing a tie and a uniform, whatever, like all of it. It's
sick what they'd be doing to children.
It's ridiculous. And I mean, it makes me mad. I want to say, okay, why don't you go back and live in a dirt floor hut and burn wood for fuel? And
just revert back to
I don't mean to be demeaning, but like, I mean, if we're gonna get right down to it,
well, you hit it on
civilization belongs to humanity. Civilization belongs to humanity, and part of civilization is the ability to communicate and share the different innovative ways that we do things, including styling our hair.
Of course. But see, you hit it on the head when you said, look at that logo, because what showed up right in the logo was the communist fist. And the reality is, if you wanted to dismantle and invert and destroy America, how would you do it? You would wall us back off into competing tribes based on immutables and all these weird identity characteristics that chop the quilt back up into its segments. And then you would turn them against each other. How do you turn them against each other? Cultural appropriation. Phase one is called intersectionality, by the way. It's got a fancy title. Intersectionality chops the quilt back up into competing tribes. Cultural appropriation turns those tribes at each other's throat. It is the antithesis of the work of Dr. King, the notions of colorblindness. The reality is America is a successful project when the white kids want to wear braids. Right? That is the success of the American project, when we are all melding into one and we are forming an American identity that isn't about that. But you even think back to how much that's been bashed into us. African American, Irish American, Italian American, right? We're always going out of our way to not identify American.
Theo, at the presentation, there apparently was talk about how it's ridiculous for white Americans. to refer to themselves as Irish American, Italian American, this American, that. In fact, comments were made about that, like, you weren't ever there. You didn't ever live there. You're not really that. It's so ridiculous that you think you're percentage this, percentage that, because we were here.
It's just
Native
insane.
Americans were here. So we know that we're Native American, but you all, that's silly for you to think of yourself as French or this or that or the other. And I'm just sitting there. I wasn't there, but I'm listening to my daughter tell me this, and I'm like, I'm glad I wasn't there.
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
really glad I wasn't there. I bet she's really glad I wasn't there.
Yeah. And that
because
goes back
I
to
don't know that I could have kept my mouth shut.
Oh, heck no. That goes back to the idea of see color, which literally the anti-racists push as one of their fundamental tenets. We must teach children to see color. Cartoon Network did the most batshit crazy animation of exactly that. A couple kids are marching down the street and they're like, I don't care your skin color. You can be black, white, brown, yellow, purple, and says purple. And this genie comes down like, wait a minute. No, we have to see color or we'll never end racism. And the whole freaking cartoon is see color. Like literally the exact opposite of color blindness. It is a radical, revolutionary dismantling engine that wants to tear down our structures. Hey, if you've got a quick sec, can you pull up the video that I just DM'd you? That goes back to that idea of the seeding that is occurring in our schools. You just played that one in Ireland on the cultural appropriation.
You DM'd me where?
I meant
to.
to.
Here, I got it. Okay.
Yeah, see if you can just pull that up and I'll tell, yes, with
right.
the kids walking in. So what this is this is just a pride function.
1 second. Let me get it pulled up.
And it's not even uniquely special. Like this wasn't like one remarkable event we need to focus on. The point is, this is what pride festivities are looking like nationwide across the West right now. And what I just want to focus in on is, imagine if you're a straight kid in the school and you walk in on this day, right? There is no party going on in the gym for straight kids. If there was a straight party in the gym with music and colors and cupcakes and songs, that would be great. And where would most of the student body be? They'd be in the gym at that party. But that's not an option. They're presented two options. One, go join the pride party, or two, go to class and be the oppressor, right? And just watch this climate as you walk in. This is why people use the term grooming. It's apt. This is grooming right here. All about the adults, all about that person in the unicorn suit. And that's really it. You can turn it off there. But the whole point is, look at the level of the indoctrination, or let's use a different word, the enticement that is being laid on these young kids in front of them. It's, you just got to school. It's a bland as heck school. And there's no color in the school at all, except at the pride party where all the teachers in their batshit crazy costumes are like, yay. I mean, that unnerves me to a level I can't even describe. And that's why we use the term grooming.
Yeah. I feel the need to say something about the people, the adults in the situation. I was thinking about it when you were speaking earlier, and then I, forgot to bring it up. So I'm remembering now. Another thing I want people to think about in the audience is, have you noticed how many people are teaching now, are teachers? I mean, whether you see them on TikTok or whatever, isn't it a little strange to you that so many people who identify as something other than male or female are so eager to be teachers?
Mm-hmm.
No, okay, remember, we're still, despite this false consensus thing, we're still talking about a really tiny percentage of the overall population.
Mm-hmm.
But they're like laser focused on being around children and being with children. Now, grooming, we use the word grooming, and a lot of people go, they don't all want to have sex with your kids. Stop it. And I'm like, I never said that. That's not what grooming is.
Exactly.
Grooming can be ideological. Grooming can be for manipulation of into all kinds of cults. Groom. They're not trying to have sex with you all the time. So con artists groom you. Grooming is just a shorthand for manipulating you into doing things you would otherwise not do over time. Slowly and over time, and breaking down your boundaries and building up a trust so that you can come in and do something that the person otherwise wouldn't have done. That's all that grooming is.
Exactly.
what you're seeing here and everything. But so many people. So I got to ask the people hiring teachers, the people hiring counselors, they said, well, we have a teacher shortage, whatever. So continue to have a shortage. Like does it not cross people's minds that this is a little disturbing? So my theory, I'm going to float a theory. It's an opinion. Curious what y'all think about it. I genuinely believe that the people who are this way and so eager to tell the whole entire world about how different they are in all these unique different ways that they even change their gender every hour or whatever, or their pronouns are different. I think they crave the audience of children. They crave to be in this environment. They crave because they are working something out on our kids. So I don't even think for most of them it is political, although I think that's part of it. I think they naturally align with that political party and with the, with the left. But I think there's a craving. There's something in them that they need to be around kids and they need to be doing this because this is their thing. It's like a weird professional Munchausen's deal.
That's an interesting way to put it.
We've got the Transhausens by proxy moms. We know most of them are borderline. They have cluster B personalities.
Mm-hmm.
I think cluster B going into this field, the cluster B personalities going to this field have the same kind of impulse of attention. I want attention, but I want it from children. Maybe they were bullied. They were outcasts. They didn't belong. They felt weird. They felt whatever they did in school. And this is their shot at power. This is their shot at taking a normie kid and turning them into one
Bingo.
of them, like Misery Loves Company. But whatever it is, it's a sickness. This is not normal. These people, I'm going to get hate mail all day long. I don't care. It is not normal to, be so focused on being around children when it's very clear that you're not interested in teaching them to read, to do math, to do science. And the reason it's clear is you wrap your door in your freaking pronouns.
Exactly.
And you wear it like a badge that this is the number one most important thing that your students should know about you. When I was a kid, I barely knew my teachers' first names, never mind their sexual orientation, whether they were married or not married, what their
Right.
political views were. I didn't have the first clue. But you know what I did know? That they really liked Ernest Hemingway, or they really loved math, or you know what? They went
Right.
into teaching because science was just their jam. We don't know what half these people like as a subject matter. And if they like English and I love to teach reading, it's to shove genderqueer in somebody's face.
Right.
That's the reading they love to teach. They're not reading Shakespeare. They're reading the graphic novel of how Romeo and Juliet had sex.
Yeah, absolutely. Fiery rant. I loved it. You touched on a lot of important things. And I think an analysis of this that lays very close to what you just said, and this is something I've written a lot about, is the idea, and this term will come across harsh, but I don't care. I don't know a better way to describe it, is the notion of the projection of daddy issues, or the idea of, like you just said, misery loves company. I came from a broken home. Therefore, I want to do XYZ to ensure the next child who comes up in that situation won't go through the struggle that I did. You see, I just was able to package that in a positive or a noble endeavor in their own minds. What they fail to understand is that most homes aren't like your home. I got into this argument with this guy whose brother was trans or some shit, but he was crazy. And he had this video on Twitter where it was every time I get into it with these childless leftist revolutionaries, when I finally pin them down logically, because I can, their dogma has logical holes, they always fall down to the same thing. Your children will grow up to hate you. They love to say that to me. Your kids will grow to hate you. And I just chuckle inside because they don't know the first thing about my house. And I got into it with this guy one time who posted this batshit crazy video about how their dad was so suppressive and abusive and, Christo-fascist and all this stuff. And how basically he's lost both his children. He doesn't have children.
Atheo-fascist, come on.
Atheo-fascist.
Get it right.
And how he's basically lost both of his children. He'll never have them. And, oh, you bigoted right-wingers, this is what you're doing to your kids. You're ruining families. And I post this dude. I'm like, bro, what you just failed to understand is my house isn't like your house. And to his credit, he replied with me. And that kid just could not see that. He cannot fathom a house that isn't like his. He comes from a broken product. So all he can envision is the broken product. He doesn't know anything about a father who tucks his son and his daughter in, and the last thing he says are uplifting words in their ear every night as I tuck him in. I tell my daughter, I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of who you are. You make your daddy proud. Those are the last words that bounce around my children's mind every night when they go to sleep. Does that bounce around and germinate into positive things and build their self-esteem? You bet your bottom dollar it does. That kid doesn't have the first clue what growing a plant in that type of garden can yield. And you see, he wants to change every garden to these rough chemicals that'll make sure the weed will grow, even in the shitty dirt he was given. He's unable to see that we didn't all come from that soil. And so where I'm going with all that, Deb, is I think that is an engine as well, and why you see so many of these collectivist or these utopic-minded leftist revolutionaries are drawn to the school system. Number one, I think it's the Yuri Bezmenov Long March to the Institutions, which we won't get into. So I think they were directed that way. That is the means of cultural takeover. Mao did the exact same thing with the Red Guard. But I do think there is an element of they are driven by what they believe. They're doing bad in the name of good, is I guess where I'm trying to go with it. It's like, I am protecting these children, failing to understand that you're actually ruining my child by telling my tomboy she could be a boy. It's that disconnect, that projection of daddy issues that, to be frank with you, and this is sort of like a doomer thing, and I try not to be a doomer guy. I think for the majority of those truly revved up radicals, we're never getting them back into the fold. I honestly believe they are going to be synonymous with Japan's lost generation. They're going to be our lost generation because they've been so radicalized, so disconnected from the moorings of reality. I just don't see how we ever plug them back in. I hate to be the bringer of that forecast, but I've given a lot of thought to it.
Because something dramatic will have to happen to wake them up. And then as you were talking, I was thinking of a meme I made a while back that I want to put on a t-shirt actually. And I wrote my own thought, and it was, the most important thing you need to know about me is that I'm not you. Because everybody's walking around going, I'm a this American, I'm a cis, I'm a blah, blah, blah. And they're listing all of their identities, including their mental illness diagnoses and their neurodivergency and all of these other things. Like, this is all part of their identity. And really all that matters is, I don't care, be whatever you want to be. Just, you're not me. Just understand that you end at the tip of your nose. Yep. And so whether it's telling me what I got to stick in my arm, or what I put over my face, or how I have to teach my kids, or what goes on in my home, or any number of other things, they have no boundaries. They're boundaryless. Sure. So what you're describing is, you're describing people. And that's why I say them going into the schools and being teachers. And my biggest concern is not that they're gay, or not that even that they're trans. I couldn't care less. Like, go ahead and have purple hair and a septum piercing and call yourself Z-Zer. It's the generative idea of doing it with children, to your point. So they have to ask you why Z-Zer, and now you get the invitation. Bingo. They asked me, I have to tell. And now it all becomes about you. My child is not at school to validate you. My child is not getting an education to make you feel included. And my child isn't going to feel more included because they made you feel included. And, enough. And this is really, this is what animates me, is this notion that we are teaching, they're teaching our children to be equally arrested in their development at a stage where, when you're little, that is appropriate. It's age appropriate to be self-absorbed because you're trying to survive. So of course you're self-absorbed. But what happens is the school comes in and stops their maturation at that point and says, yes, let's look at your feelings, and your feelings are valid, and your feelings are real, and your fantasies are real. And let's affirm every little magical thinking, thought that you have. And yes, utopia is possible. And the grownups are mean and awful, and they labeled you a boy or a girl, and you get stuck. Mm-hmm. And so the reason that these kids are going to be, those who get really stuck there, are really going to be hard to wake up, and they're going to end up depressed, possibly suicidal, or just homicidal at some point, certainly not productive, is that you cannot remain a 6-year-old into your 30s.
Yeah, I love the term.
Do that.
Yeah, I love the term. Very well said. I love the term arrested development. And I have described this leftist revolutionary movement as a movement of arrested development. And it's exactly what you see. I posted a collage, if you will, of video clips on Twitter, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. And it was a series of these protests of the Rainbow Guard showing up, and they're getting increasingly unhinged. And the imagery from them is so staggering. And what I was pointing out, and it sounds rude, but I don't care, it's important facts and truth for us to address, is if you look at these crowds. They are arrested development. They're largely childless. They're largely the downtrodden in life. These are the people who aren't rising through our typical social structures. Aha, light bulb. That's why they want to invert them and dismantle them and change the power structure. What did the anti-bullying campaign achieve? Did it reduce bullying?
Nothing.
Hell no.
No.
Bullying is worse than ever. All it did is gave the blue hair kid some plastic muscles from the admin structure he never had before, and now he gets to bully the jock. It's a complete inversion of the bullying structure. It didn't mitigate bullying at all.
Worse than that, it took what the movie avatar of the jock is always a bad guy, and it made it real in real life.
Exactly.
So they took what was just a Hollywood stereotype, and they've now said, and that's legitimate. Just like if you play with trucks, you're really a boy. And if you like pink, you're a girl. All these stereotypes that we spent, I'm Gen X, so we spent generations fighting and saying, no, a girl, Fran Lebowitz can wear a suit, but she's still Fran. She's still a woman and a great photographer. And yes, she's a lesbian, but she's still a woman.
Right. Isn't that the irony? We have Ellen Page standing up at some award show as Elliot Page, standing next to another girl who I believe has transitioned to a boy. So it's two girls standing on stage in male suits, which, like you just said, we fought for decades for girls to be able to wear the male suit and us to be able to say, that's okay, Ellen. You can wear whatever freaking clothes you like.
Right.
Here we are. The snake is eating its own tail. Where now it's Elliot.
Do it.
Right. Now we have to call you Elliot and your friend that. I mean, it's so crazy. But where I was going with that, the scenes of the Rainbow Guard being so crazy is the arrested development in spades. The downtrodden, sort of the elements of society who weren't naturally going to get there. That is what the queering movement is all about. It no longer has anything to do with sexuality. You can just latch on to one of these identity categories and then you become special. Even the president praises you as special.
Have you read the queer pedagogy? Or the queer trans, I think it's called it's not queer pedagogy, it's called drag pedagogy. There's a research paper, no joke. I did a video about it. James has talked about it.
I think I've heard it referenced.
This paper will blow your mind. It is a research paper co-written by Little Miss Hot Mess, who is the drag queen,
the New York one,
who created Drag Queen Story Hour. And in there, it's all there for all the world to see. Well, yes, of course we go along with the parents and we tell them we're doing it for this, but really we're there to queer, like they're basically announcing it. And if it's okay, I want to get back, we were talking about teachers are not therapists. I wanted to show you something else. It's kind of in the same vein because we're talking about woo. I mean, basically what we're talking about is religion. We're talking about things that are not grounded in reality.
Yep,
we're talking about people who, right. Well, have you seen this? Do you know what Panorama Education is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Panorama Ed is one of the big SEL companies. They put out, this is, I think Mark Zuckerberg is a big investor in it. The Attorney General's son-in-law is a co-owner of
That's what I was to say. Merrick Garland's daughter is married to the owner.
Married to the owner of this company. They put out those surveys. They're data mining the living bejesus out of your kids.
Just to make sure everybody got that there. That's the Attorney General for America, who has now twice sicked the security state, the FBI, onto dissenting parents who were showing up at school board meetings against this leftist revolutionary scripture being in our schools. He puts the state force on those parents and calls them domestic terrorists, all the while protecting his son-in-law, who's one of the top peddlers of critical race theory curriculum in America. It's amazing how
and is data mining children for use. We don't know when and where and how and who's buying it, including the government. If it's being used in government schools, that means the government owns it, co-owns the data. That means all the data mining he's doing gets to be owned by the government. And because it's part of SEL and funded with ESSER funds, that's federal funds, not the state funds, it means the federal government gets to own it. And you know how long they keep it? 70 years.
Yep, because they want to get into our kids' minds.
And what are they going to do with all that data? So anyway, I wanted to show you guys this because this is them saying, by centering student voice. Now, what is student voice?
Words.
Student voice is just the students' opinions about what should be in the world, okay? By centering student voice, Cielo Vista has seen an 8% increase in growth mindset over the school year, and they're just getting started. Well, I'm not even going to read the article because I don't need to read the article. Then people say that's so close-minded of you. You should read the article. So, all right, I'll open it up. But what I can tell you is, thinking about everything in your life right now, what feels the hardest for you? Out of all the questions on Cielo Vista's elementary school
Unbelievable.
SEL survey, it's the one that has
Teachers
made
as shrinks.
the biggest impact on student success. Thinking about everything in your life, what feels the hardest to you. So now this little kid in elementary school is going to tell this private corporation paid for with your tax dollars, it has connections to the federal government, what feels hardest for them. It's now documented.
What are the hard things in your life? And then the next step becomes, where are those
Mommy
coming
this,
from?
Daddy that, my sister this, my house, I'm poor. Oh, we're going to document all that. Then it says it's the one thing that's made the biggest impact on student success. And how do they know that? Student success and what? Define success, first of all, because I can tell you right now, these kids can't read. So what do they define as success? And they're talking about the growth mindset. Define that. It says here, student perceptions of whether they have the potential to change those factors that are central to their performance in school. They needed an SEL survey to figure that out. You know how you do that? You're good in watch Marva Collins. Yes, you can. She would just, kid would say, oh, I can't. Yes, you can. Don't ever say can't in my classroom. That's what I used to say. I taught first grade. Kids say, I can't, and never say can't. Never say can't. You can do your best. You can try. You can do better tomorrow than you did today. Don't say can't. Or sometimes I would say can't, never could. So
that sentence is the dumbest thing I've ever read. Student perceptions of whether they have the potential to change those factors that are central to their performance in school. That is the dumbest thing I've ever read. It's just
and you measure that how? Explain to me how you measure student perceptions using a survey.
Same way you measure white supremacy.
Elementary school kid is going to fill out coloring in little things. Okay, so this is so what they say 8% by centering student voice being they ask them this question. That's student voice. That's all it takes. And that focus has made a big difference. By centering student voice, is seen an 8% increase in growth mindset over the school year. So that perception, 8% believe that more. And that so centering student voice did that. How about teaching? You know what else makes a kid feel like they can succeed in school? Learning to read.
Yeah, and this
takes us, that teaches them to read.
Exactly. And this takes us back to square one. Why are our teachers, our educators sending out surveys asking other people's children to vomit everything negative going on in their life onto a government form? Because the next stage of this becomes, oh, you're being made to feel bad at home? Well, why is that? Are you really a they, them? Are your parents Christians? Do they not support you being a they, them? And now we segue ourselves right into those new laws in California and Oregon and Washington, don't we? And we go back to the very first step of this. Why did the school get geared in this manner? Why is our school proactively, I don't know what word to use otherwise, why are they outbound reaching out? Why are they seeding mental health concerns into our children? Hey, children, welcome to school today.
Money power.
Absolutely. And revolution, to be honest with you, because they want to make lifelong activists. Yeah, that's the power.
That's the power. But it's actually money first. So yes, I believe that the power thing is big, but it's money first. And the power follows, because what does the money buy them? Well, the money buys them the ability to control the narratives, to control the media, to control all the things so that we can barely get our message out that says this is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, people. Yeah. Look at this. And a parent with common sense understands that, we talk to teachers about so many aspects of growth mindset, including what their classroom could look like. We even discuss setting up tables and chairs to show these spaces are supportive of growth mindset. I'm sorry. Did you ever remember back to when you were a student, parents, grandparents, whoever's out there in the audience? Did you walk into a classroom and say, oh, well, forget it now. I the desks are not in a pattern that is conducive to my belief that I can be successful in this school? Did that thought ever cross your damn mind?
No, of course not.
The only thought I might have had was, if I'm seated next to my bully, then maybe I won't be very successful in this class. But the physical arrangement of the chairs and the tables had absolutely nothing to do with it other than that.
Elementary feng shui, Deb. It's elementary feng shui. Everything on that damn page is it's sort of the building blocks we talked about earlier. And what I mainly see jumping out in the language of that page is the elevation of the subjective over the objective. Almost 100%. Every metric they're laying out there are just leftist spells. It doesn't make any sense. Like, oh, these kids who feel affirmed, woo, exactly. And they feel better about the things we're affirming them. They show an 8% growth in how they feel as better people. Like, what the hell are we talking about? It reminds me of the Facebook groups commercial, some whacked out teenager kid talking about transcendence. You got to find your transcendence, man, whether it's through the Astros or the blah, blah. It's all that Gnostic crap, Deb. And that's why it's being driven by radical atheists.
It's about a feeling. It's about feeling accepted and part of a community. It's about having goals. It's about grit and not giving up. So we're taking each of these pieces one step at a time. I hate to break it to y'all. Grit cannot be deconstructed.
Right.
Grit is not something you deconstruct, nor is a feeling of acceptance and belonging. There are no component parts to these things. This is subjective. And every little child in every class, if there are 30 kids, there are 30 different ways to feel and show grit, to feel and show acceptance,
growth,
to growth. And the job of the adult in the room is not to try to figure out how to construct it so that it works for every single one of them the same way. That is, if you thought one size fits all teaching of reading was bad, one size fits all teaching how to feel comfortable in your own body, in your own skin, and in your own space in a social environment doesn't work. The way you do it is you model being okay in your own damn skin, and you don't do that by wrapping the door with your freaking special pronouns and demanding that people use them.
Absolutely. You know, what was jumping out at me as you were saying that there is one of my all-time favorite quotes about parenting, maybe the greatest parenting quote of all time. We must prepare our children for the path, not the path for our children. It's one of the greatest quotes because that is reality. Life is going to come marching at you and throw curveballs and two-handed broadswords at you, no matter how well you prep. So if your way of preparing your child is to make sure the path in front of them is clear, you've signed your kid up for failure. What you need to do is not worry about prepping the path and teach your kid how to deal with all the obstacles they're going to overcome or they're going to run into. When we talk about rearranging desks to make every student, be better in their fields when they come in, it's the exact opposite. It's this unique, it's the subjective over the objective. Let me sidetrack this real quick though. Wait,
did you see what See the Whole Truth says? I just want to point to that.
No, please do.
It says grit is from being ground down to the unbreakable bits, being bits left and glued to integrity of intention to slowly shape the living in adversity. A freaking men. And people say, oh, are you suggesting that the kids be ground down? No, I'm saying you fall down, you get back up. You fall down, you get back up. That's called life.
Of course.
Human beings are literally, as an organism, are designed to be anti-fragile. We are designed to repair ourselves, body and soul. And if you get in the way of that, you make incredibly fragile creatures. You make creatures that are literally destined for a mental distress.
Of course. And this isn't, what you're saying is not rocket science. It's so obvious. If you don't let the child fall down and stumble, they'll never learn how to walk on their own. Reminds me of one of the greatest bits I ever saw from a stand-up comedian. It was Chris Rock. He was talking about, he was kind of comparing and contrasting raising kids when he was young versus how we raise them now. And he's like, we just paid $10,000 to have some company come and nerf the whole house. They put plastic things on every corner and things in all the outlets, this, that, and the other. He's like, man, shit has changed so much from when I was a kid. He's like, I remember when I was young and mama left the oven door open and I went to touch it and somebody stopped them. And my mom pushed them away and said, nope, let them touch it. Let him touch it. And obviously it's meant to be a funny joke, but the premise is so true. You can't just go around and nerf children like that, or all you do is stunt their development. And we're doing that now system-wide.
And they're having morning meetings. Every meeting, they're starting their day with the navel gazing. And look at what an example is. This is elementary school, okay?
Elementary school.
We had a lot of survey responses about the pandemic. Students were concerned about people being sick or passing away, or they hadn't been able to see family. That was all good. So we had to consider that when developing supports. No, you didn't have to do any of that.
Correct.
You didn't have to do any of that. You had to move along and create normalcy for these kids. Keep on keeping on.
Right.
We're here. We're at school. We're learning. We're moving on. Maybe one of you is going to grow up and invent a great antiviral and everything's going to be great. And you know what? People persevered through the freaking Spanish flu. They persevered through World War I, World War II, famines, droughts, etc. We tell these, we have to develop supports because they're afraid of a virus and then it doesn't affect them. But scary things.
There's nothing more offensive or blood boiling than the idea of mentally traumatizing our children by our own adult decisions and policies, and then using that as justification for new measures you're going to enact because of their fragile mental health. That's in essence what that site is saying. You're saying
Create the problem and then come in and sell the
yeah,
solution.
and every morning they're starting off with these groveling sessions about what has you down today. Of course your freaking kids are depressed. I'd be depressed too if my family started off every morning with like, let's make a sad list. Right? I'd prefer to start every day with like, let's make a happy list. We saw this same dynamic with vaccination. There was a UK vaccine minister. I know this is completely off topic, but it's worth sharing. A UK vaccine minister who in early 2021 was questioned on why they were approving mass pediatric vaccination for all of the UK. He specifically said on camera, I link the video clip all the time, they could not find a direct safety basis. They could not find a community safety basis. So they ultimately fell back to mental health basis. He said that the children had become so scared of the virus that getting vaccinated would bring them relief in their mental health. And that was what they justified mass pediatric vaccination.
I wonder how they're going to feel when they have myocarditis.
Right. They scared the shit out of these children and traumatized them with COVID fear porn. And now you're going to use that as justification to vaccinate them, to get them to chill out. It's the same dynamic we're seeing here. We're going to constantly push mental health crap and intersectionality and affirmation and inclusivity and all this crazy emotional baggage onto our kids. And then we're going to turn around and be like, oh my God, we surveyed our kids. They're all depressed. They're a mental mess. Yeah, I know.
See this?
You did it.
Can you see this? What's up on the screen now?
Yeah, I've seen that chart before. It's god awful.
Okay, so you're talking about intersectionality. Oh, this goes way beyond it. They're using this in schools. And look at all the racism, sexism, homophobia, heterosexism, ageism, ableism.
It's just horrible. I hate that. I hate that more than I have words to describe.
They're using it in schools. They're dividing kids into all of these different things and telling them they're either a victim or oppressor based on this.
Bingo.
And then we wonder why. Yeah, this is how we create the mental the distress, and they're classifying everyone as tier 1. All the kids come in as tier 1, basically meaning they're going to be surveyed and they're looking for these problems. Then as we started the show, they're going to be funneled into the counselors, those who stand out as having any kind of an issue. Now, remember, being too individualistic and having parents who are individualists, that in and of itself is a mental illness.
Absolutely.
Now,
not accepting Zim. That's immense. That's hatred.
It is classified as hate speech, and the people who do that are mentally ill abusers too.
Yeah, absolutely. Take them
away.
We
have to be very, very careful to get them away from that. And this is just becoming. That is why the other day you probably saw my thread, my big long thread. After I found out that man lost his kids, I went on X and I said, I can no longer in clear conscience, I can't advise anybody anymore about how to stay in the schools. So if you're coming to me and saying, how do I push back against my school? What do I say? What do I write in an email? What do I say at the school board meeting? What do I do? I said, I'm not giving you advice about that anymore. If you are so upset about what's going on in your kid's school that you feel this need to speak and go to the school board meetings and do all the things and whatever, please get your kid out first. Like, if you do it while your kid is in the school, even if you and your spouse are fully aligned, you are putting your child at risk. Now, obviously, the age of your child makes a difference. If they're, 16 and they're on a sports team, or they're not going to leave school anytime soon, whatever, and they can handle themselves, okay, fine. But if you've got a kid in elementary school, that kid is vulnerable. They could retaliate against your child. They could retaliate against you. You could lose your job. There are all these things. And what I realized was, when the stakes are as high as you could lose your kids, and the guy lost his kids for asking too many questions about DEI. This had nothing to do with gender. I think a lot of parents console themselves and say, well, my kid's not going to transition, so then it won't be a problem. So I'm just complaining about books, or I'm just complaining about this SEL, or I'm just going to push back against that. You have no idea what it's going to take, or what the principal or the administrators are going to do to come back at you or your kid. And do you really want to take that chance? Are you prepared? Do you have a lawyer lined up? And do you know that they'll represent you? And do you know you can afford it? I mean, you're a lawyer, so you can tell people this is not cheap.
Yeah.
And these people have qualified immunity, and you don't. They have in loco parentis rights. You once the kid's out of your hands and you put them there, you've basically agreed to whatever they're doing there. And I cannot advise people anymore to put themselves at risk, because I realized, hearing the story, I said, if I had been one to advise that guy to write those emails, I would never forgive myself.
Yeah, they were
would
heavy
never
thoughts you
forgive
shared.
myself.
I understand where they came from. Two things I wanted to share. One comment I meant to share a long time ago, but you just kind of touched back on it, was when we were talking about this sort of reaching out dynamic of guidance counseling now in schools, which again, I think one of the most important things to do right now is to recognize. I play poker, and in poker, we have something called tells. Tells are when somebody at the table does something that cues you into something about their hand. And what you're seeing in media and in speeches from Team Biden and in channels like that are giving us very important tells of things to come. And one kind of the whole reason Deb and I titled this talk this way and hooked up for this was this idea of teachers are not shrinks. And we talked about at the start of the conversation, these increasing speeches and rhetoric coming out of Joe himself of how mental health is really an issue for our kids and we need to fill that hole. We need to give them more care, give them more support and all that. The point I wanted to make is that putting your children into school guidance counseling, and Deb touched on this earlier, is like setting them on a track that gets permanently flagged in their files. They are now a kid who has some sort of mental issue that requires counseling. And you may think that verbiage I just used is unfair, but it's not. It's accurate. And even if their quote need was something as trivial or simple as they were asked to fill out a survey and they checked the wrong answers on it that flagged their file of, oh, they need to go meet with Sally, the guidance counselor. As soon as they meet with Sally, they are forever one of the folders of kids that are in the counseling pipe. And my whole point is, as a parent, I don't want my children in that pipe unless they absolutely have to be. An interesting analogy that I think helps paint this picture and why it's so important. My daughter has a slight speech impediment. She says like TH is slightly wrong. Well, my wife is a lifelong teacher. She's got a master's degree in elementary education. She still does admission testing. So my point being is I'm quite confident in my wife's abilities to be able to correct the speech issue. Well, somebody a year or two ago noticed that at her school, and they reached out to my wife and they were just saying, hey, we'd like them to meet with the speech therapist. Not a big deal. I don't think speech therapy is something nefarious. But my point is, I didn't want my daughter's file to be permanently marked as needing therapy of some kind from the state. Right. So unless that need was completely urgent and completely necessary, and we did not have the mechanisms to address it on our own, I don't want to turn my children over to state help in that regard. It's the same analysis in the vein of counseling. You don't want your child's folder marked as a child in need of state counseling unless you absolutely have to be. So everybody needs to be aware that by changing it from a reactive posture to a proactive seeding posture, right, they're getting all your kids' files flagged with this. And when that happens, it's going to impact them long term. It's something that should scare the shit out of you, even if some of these other things don't seem to be on your front porch. Do you think that's
those
fair?
labels will follow them around for the rest of their lives?
Exactly.
And that's why I said, be very careful when you leave them in that environment. I don't know how to get across to people that it is technically, by every definition of the term, child abuse to triangulate. It is. If parents did it with each other, it's considered abuse. In other words, you the good cop, bad cop thing, we joke about it when it's benign, like go ask your mother, or, dad says yes, mom says no, whatever. But when you have a situation where one person is routinely putting the child monkey in the middle because they're a child and these are supposedly mature adults, that is considered abuse. It's a kind of manipulation that is abusive because the child is in a subservient position. So when you have a teacher who is triangulating with the parents, trust me, I'm your trusted adult. Mom and dad don't know. I'll keep your secret. That is so wrong. Yeah. First of all, telling a child to keep secrets from their parents, we know already is abuse. 100% abuse. Then, even if they're not doing the telling of the secret, if they're just saying, come to me and oh, really? Your parents don't agree? Oh, that's too bad. Well, I'll listen to you. The job of any adult in a child's life who is not their parent, always, even unless and until you genuinely have evidence of real abuse on the part of the parent, and then you're duty bound to report it. You could not like the parent. You could think the parent's a hard ass. The parent is too strict. You could disagree with everything they're doing, their religion, their value, everything. It is still your job for the health of that child, physical as well as mental, to be a support, to back up the family. That used to be axiomatic in everything, in counseling, in teaching. When I came up in teaching, even though they taught me some Freudian BS, when I started at my first job, they put us through orientation, and they were adamant about this. You do not step in and parent that kid. You don't discipline that kid in any kind of parental way. You don't interfere with what the parent's doing. If you genuinely suspect abuse, you have to report it. But up until then, you defer to the parent. I think you need to talk to your mom about that. Yeah, I think,
Right.
you need to talk to your mom. And if the kid goes, will you talk to my mom with me about that? You say, well, I think you can talk to your mom about that. And it's, you kind of nudge them, and that way you can find out if they, no, I'm really scared they'll hit me. Okay, now you've got some reason. But if you're saying like, I think you can do it. I think your mom will listen. And you then look and see what the response is, because 90% of the time, the kid just doesn't want to confront mom with anything, or mom or dad with anything that isn't perfectly wonderful all the time. That's pretty natural amongst kids, especially elementary school. So it doesn't have to be anything dire like I'm gay. It can just be, I didn't do great on my test, or I want to go get this book from the library, but I know mom and dad are really busy at work and they don't have time to take me in, and they're constantly complaining about being busy and tired all the time, and I don't want to cause them stress, which is not abuse. It's just they have stressed out parents. So,
Right.
A little nudge. And, then the kid might say, well, my parents work really hard and they're busy all the time and they can't take me or whatever. Then you might say, well, would you like me to ask your mom if I can help get the book for you? So then you can go to you've now been invited to talk to the parent in a way that's appropriate. So you can have these conversations, but you do not say, I'll just do it for you. I'll get you the book. I'll take care of it. Now you're parenting. You're interfering.
The problem we have, though. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I was just going to say, the parent might say, oh, no, I can do it. I can go, whatever. I can go to the library. It's totally fine. And be like, oh, see, it's all good. Yeah, that's great. Whatever. And now maybe the kid is more empowered to ask mom the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, these used to be axiomatic. We all agreed on this. But the problem, the crisis we now face, Deb, is look how radically far, not discussion or tweets or even ideology on liberal arts campuses has gone, but look how far this is now codified into our law. I talked earlier about that New York Department of Education guidance. I pulled the document up. It's called the State Education Department, Creating a Safe, Supportive, and Affirming School Environment for Transgender and Gender Expansive Students, 2023 Legal Update and Best Practices. It's sent to all schools in New York. I'm reading straight from a page of it here. Tips for when a student comes out to you. Teachers, school counselor, coaches, or other adults who are known allies will often be the first person within a school community to whom a student will come out. When a student comes out as TGE, it is recommended that the trusted individual and the student have a conversation concerning the student's needs, concerns, goals, and safety. When TGE students disclose their gender identity to school personnel, it is because they feel safe. However, as students may not have disclosed their gender identity to parents, guardians, friends, or even other school staff, it is important that school personnel receiving this information keep it confidential unless the student explicitly states otherwise. So here you are talking about something that is not only axiomatic, but is just basic fundamentals of the parent's domain being directly subverted by law in the state of New York.
And we know, and which state was this?
New York.
Yeah, and New Jersey, it's state law. They open up 2 files when you register your child at the school. They open up 2 files automatically in the computer. Wow. One for the parents to see and one for the parents not to see, just in case.
Yeah, I'd be in pitchforks in front of the school. Before we, in case we end here, I just want to share something real quick. I wanted to make sure I included in this chat. And I'll make sure this isn't a long-winded one. But the reason I'm sharing this story is I just want everybody who's listening to this to understand these are not remote and distant concepts that people like Deb and I are spending so much time talking about. This is not just culture war stuff. It's not Twitter stuff. And even if you feel like you're in the most protected environment where you don't see this stuff in your Monday through Friday, day to day, I am telling you, this stuff is in your community and it's in your schools And you just don't know because you're ignorant to it still. And I just very briefly want to share an anecdotal story that happened with me and my precious daughter, who's the absolute center of my world. As I mentioned before, my daughter was a tomboy, has been her whole life. So when I started to understand what was going on with this revolutionary energy that had now taken on the form of queering and gender ideology, once the white supremacy and racecraft had largely failed, I became very concerned because I knew my daughter was just a dream canvas for one of these activists to get in her mind. And at the same time, I didn't want to bring this up to my daughter because she was only in second grade. And I had the fear that I would be the one who would seed this stuff into her head. So I was like walking this delicate line in my own mind and had never brought it up to my daughter. Fast forward one day, her brother's born. He's a baby at this time. He's maybe 6 months old. I don't know. Well, she's in second grade. He's very young. Out of the blue, we hadn't been talking about anything having to do with these topics. My daughter throws out in the middle of the living room when it's me, her brother, and her sitting there. She says, "Daddy, is my brother not a girl or a boy?" And at first it just sounded like a silly, stupid child question. So I responded with something stupid and silly, like, "Oh, come on, silly. What else would he be? Of course he is." Or no, here's how I said it. I go, "Of course he's a boy. What else would he be?" And man, without thinking, she fires back at me, "That fish that can change from a girl to a boy." And my ears just went bing, because for anybody listening to this, the clownfish, the gingerbread man, the gender unicorn are three of the most common ways these ideologues and these perverts get their ideological tentacles into your young children's minds, are through those three tools, and they're in schools, likely in your school. So it was at that time I realized, my goodness, something's getting in my daughter's ear. What I wanted to share about this, it's so important, is I live in Florida. And this is post DeSantis's moves where we're sort of leading the spearhead or the front line of getting this shit out of our schools. I'm in Florida. I'm in one of the best counties in Florida. It's known for having great schools. It's why we moved to this county. And then my daughter goes to a public school that's right in the front of my community. We couldn't be happier with her school. So in 3 layers or fortifications, if you will, of defense against this leftist revolutionary scripture in our schools, something had gotten to my daughter. I would find out 2 years later that it was from a music teacher, and that the music teacher had given a lesson on
So it's
gender
the
changing
music or the
fish.
art
It's
teacher
always
or
the music
drama
teacher.
teacher.
She was gone. She looked quite leftist in hindsight. I didn't really think about it at the time, but I play it back in my mind and I'm like, yep, the cover of the book matched the contents inside. She's now gone. By the time I found it out, there was nothing I could do about it. I'm not so crazy that I ran down to the school and, had pitchforks and stuff in my hands. Largely because I wasn't sure where it came from. I was a little bit hesitant on the last point of it I want to share is it was at that moment I realized I now had to address this with my daughter. Somebody else was painting the canvas and the canvas was currently blank. And if I don't jump in with my own brush, then they're going to paint the image they want. And I've now lost. And I was really upset about it because I didn't want to talk about this with my second grade daughter. Right. In fact, I reached out to Billboard Chris in private messages in DM, and he was kind enough to have a private conversation with me about some advice on how to approach her. He's a wonderful guy who's dedicated his life to this cause. And I did, and I delicately planted some seeds. All's well that ends well. My daughter's actually largely grown out of being a tomboy now, and she's kind of turned more girly on her own initiative, whatever. She can be whatever she wants. But I'm sharing that story because I just want everyone to understand that even in my triple layered fortification, this stuff landed right on my porch. And man, I don't think most people are going to appreciate the severity and the magnitude of this crisis until it lands on their front porch as well. I hate to say that, but I think that's where we are.
I hate to say that too, but I would tend to agree with you. And it breaks
my
heart.
You got to feel the hurt.
It breaks my heart. And I keep trying to tell them, they'll say, but I'm in a good district, or but this, or but that, or but I know my kid's teacher. And I'm like, even when you have a kid in a grade where they have the one teacher, all the time, there's still that music teacher, there's the librarian, there are the counselors, there are the social workers, there are all these other individuals who are constantly in your kid's face. And the teachers are under a lot of pressure. So I am sympathetic to good teachers who obviously exist, and they're out there. They're actually the majority. They're just cowed in many cases. There are a percentage who don't know it's bad, who are just kind of going along with it, and they don't really realize it. There's sort of NPC level. They're not, they're well-intentioned, but they're like, I don't know, I was taught this.
We see a lot of that at fancy private schools, high money private schools.
Yeah. So you've got that. Then you've got the teachers who are really good teachers who close the door and they try to do their own thing behind the closed door and they try to hold it off as much as they can, but there's a limit to what they can do because if the school counselor or the principal, somebody comes along and says, I'm pulling your kid, I'm taking this kid out to do this or that, you can't stop them. If they say, you know, you need more flags in your classroom because we're doing an equity audit, what are you going to do? And if you are, you know, you can't give up your job for any number of reasons, they're in the same pickle the parents are in who say, I have to keep sending my kid to the school. So it's a really big problem. And the only reason I went whole hog and said, you know, if it's that bad that you are, I got to do something. Like, in other words, if you're at the point of I see it, not I fear it, but I see it. It's like it has come to my doorstep, or I'm seeing it in the classroom, or that Pride Day scenario that we showed in the video.
Right.
If that's your school,
Yeah,
as
I
an
have pitchforks
example,
at that point. Yeah.
then you either better round up a whole group of people to go speak out with you so you're not alone,
Or get your kid out of there.
or get your kid out of there. There's
I agree.
really not, I wish I had better news, but you're not going to fight City Hall. And this is way beyond City Hall.
Yeah.
This is
You know,
way bigger.
Another point that we got to factor in here, and I wrote a thread about this a couple weeks ago, and it started with my daughter was never girly, and kind of went into her background. And where I went with the thread was, I said, what is it about my daughter, about my tomboy, that she didn't become a Frankenstein trans boy down the road? Was she just one of them that wasn't born in the wrong body? And I was obviously being facetious for a reason. And where I landed it
Exactly.
was, no, that's not the explanation. The explanation is she has influence elsewhere. And I trailed into an event that's held at the Catholic Church in St. Augustine called Night Fire. But the whole point of referencing that was just to reference where my daughter's other influences come from. She has a really good mom. She has a really good dad. She lives by 2 grandparents. She goes to church a lot. She has other values and other influences that were in her ear telling her, no, you're not a clownfish. And my point in mentioning that isn't to make myself sound great or my daughter great. We're just another American family. My point is, this is a movement that preys on the broken and the vulnerable. What if my daughter didn't have a great mom, didn't have a great dad, or didn't have a dad at all, and had a mom who's working 3 jobs and is never home and didn't go to church, didn't have any other influences, and was quite a sad kid? Then all of a sudden, maybe they're interested in what that music teacher says. And next thing you know, my daughter's living as a boy, and their new family, their new person who understands the real them is this ideologue in their music class. And before you know it, that child has no connection with their home at all. In fact, their home are now the antagonists. And this movement preys on the vulnerable, because people like my daughter aren't as likely to get sucked in because she comes home to me and her mom, and she goes to church every Sunday. She has different influences pulling her in another direction. Do you think it's a coincidence that the University of Pittsburgh funded a program on sex education for autistic children? And yes,
Nope,
it's
it is
as
not.
horrific as it sounds. Karlin Borshenko did some phenomenal investigative work on it. It was funded by the University of Pittsburgh, which if you go to their Twitter account, their U Pitt logo, it's the color of the leftist revolution flag. Of course it is. That's why they're funding these queer plus indoctrination programs specifically for autistic children. Why autistic children, folks? Because they naturally don't have the same barriers to prevent people from meddling in their minds. This is such a wicked ideology that wants to get its tentacles into those that are vulnerable. They didn't get my daughter because my daughter's not vulnerable. But what about the millions of kids who are, man? We're just going to let them be cannon fodder to leftist revolution because human rights and inclusivity? It's insane. Absolutely insane.
Well, and I get a lot when I criticize SEL and, they're trying to sell the mental health thing. What I hear all the time is, not everybody has a mom like you.
Projection of daddy issues. We're back
And
to that story.
I say it like, I didn't have a mom like me. And
Right.
thank God I didn't have SEL. I was a tomboy too. Like
Right.
hardcore.
Right.
I cut all my hair off and I mutilated my Barbies and I played in an all boys soccer team. So no, I didn't like that she had the high heel feet. It drove me crazy. So I kept pressing her feet down so she could walk like a normal person. And eventually that little rubbery stuff came off and she just had these little nubs of like plastic cartilage sticking out of her legs. And I gave her mohawks and I took magic marker and put, anyway. So yeah, I was very much a tomboy, and I had the like latchkey kid, mom left, dad's, so I didn't have a mom like me. But I developed grit, like we're talking about. I was lucky in the respect that my dad and my grandfather, who was a big influence in my life, had expectations of me to,
Hello.
my grandfather used to say to me, he said, life is not a dream in the clover, onto the walls, onto the walls, onto the walls and over. And he said it all the
I
time.
like
The
it.
guy was a veteran of both world
My,
wars.
my,
So,
my lieutenant colonel father put it a little more concise. He said, life ain't fair. And he's
yeah,
right.
that too. I would say it's not fair. And I would hear life isn't fair. And so I got this message. So the message that kept getting repeated was not in a mean way. It was like, don't expect, it was just life isn't fair. This is life, Deb.
Right.
This is how it is. You have some good days, you have some bad days. I also was asked a question a lot of kids aren't asked today. I would say things like, why me? About whatever. I broke my leg twice. I'm lying in the hospital. Why me? Whatever. And the question that came back was, why not you?
Yeah.
And I was like, what, what? And then, it's unfortunate it happened to you. And I know it hurts and this stinks. And there's no making this a good thing. Like I heard that, but I also heard, but do you really want someone else to have a broken leg? It's like, what, why if things happen, accidents happen. You were riding a horse. That's not exactly a completely safe activity. Sometimes when you take risks, things happen and that's okay because you'll get back on the horse and whatever. So it was presented to me like, this is life. This is just part of life. And these kids they're trying to shield them from all these things. And no, it should be perfect. You should be perfect.
You're describing you're describing the opposite of the word narcissism. Everything you're describing is the polar opposite of a narcissistic ideology or mindset or worldview where everything is about you, where planet Earth caters to you and coddles your feelings. That's where we are in this whole movement right now. I mean, look at just take pronouns and set it on the table by itself. Pronouns are a third-party descriptor. They are a piece of language I use to describe you. We've landed
when you're
at a
not
point,
there.
Right. We've landed at a point now where a narcissist commands on to me what I am to call them, even if it's something as crazy as zir and zur and zim. And prior to 6 months ago, I had to say that or my mouth got taped shut. I mean, it's so crazy. Like, no, pronouns are not a cult
if you
creed.
try to do it in public.
I know, it's crazy. They're not a cult creed. They're not a vehicle of coercion. They're a descriptive term of my choice. But it just goes to show how much this is a movement focused on self. I tweeted over the weekend, it is so gross to see a movement so singularly fixated on
But it's
self.
a false self.
It is a false self.
I have to
It
draw
literally,
the distinction
Deb.
because there's something actually quite healthy about helping a child develop a strong and confident and boundaried and well-adjusted and mature sense of self. Like
That's
I
a good
said,
point.
what the most important thing to know about me is I'm not you. I end here and you, because what does that mean? If I understand that I end at the tip of my nose, I'm capable of leaving you alone. I'm capable of understanding that you're a separate and unique individual who owns their life and owns their stuff. And I'm not to lie to you and steal your things and hurt you and all the rules that the civilization we thought, was run by. And I have to do that by developing a sense of self, but it's a healthy sense of self. It's a rational self-interest. It's not an irrational self-interest. Irrational self-interest is I want when I want when I want it. It's a temper tantrum. It's the world doesn't match what I expect it to be, and it needs to be made this way, or else I'm going to be mad and I'm going to kick my feet and I'm going to do bad things.
Sure.
And I'm going to make everyone else's life miserable until I get what I want. That is a toddler's mindset. So it's a kind of self that's immature. We talked about arrested development, and it's completely irrational. But what I worry about, I genuinely worry, because I'm seeing this on the right, is I see people who take that, when we say it's a focus on the self and they're obsessed with the self, and they go all the way to altruism the other way, the Christian, sort of this hyper Christian, you must give and you must do for others and you must live for your husband and live for your children. And, so now it's like, there'd be no self. You have to live for others because God.
Right.
And I'm sorry, there's no difference. It's just, you're just taking a different God, and maybe you're more polite. Maybe you're a little nicer about it. Maybe you have a nice church supper on Wednesday nights, but it's still the abandonment of any kind of rational, boundaried sense of self that allows you to have self-determination and choose.
Good point.
I choose to be charitable. I choose not to be charitable today because you know what? I'm hungry. I can't give you my food. That's okay too. You're supposed to be a
Yeah, it's
happy
a-
giver. You're not supposed to cut your arm off because somebody else doesn't have one.
Yeah, that's very well said, Deb. That really is the danger, and we're seeing this across so many fronts of the old pendulum, right? When the pendulum swings too far out this way, then it's going to come crashing back that way, and we allow it to swing too far out this way. So we got to this batshit crazy societal place because we allowed the pendulum to swing way too far out left. It's
Right.
coming back in like a freaking wrecking ball now.
No,
to the
and now
right.
you've got people saying, let's ban this, ban abortion and ban this
Right.
and ban that. It's like, so you don't want to call the removal of a book a ban because it's not a ban. It's a curation. I'll go with you there. But you're perfectly okay banning other things that for which, it's like not your bit. Now, banning surgeries for children. Yes, please. That's different. They can't consent. But telling consenting adults, even if I disagree, I think it's the most immoral and horrible and barbaric thing in the world. But telling other consenting adults what they can and can't do in the privacy of their own homes or, between their doctor, whatever, I got to reluctantly say, like, I don't mean to like wear my politics or anything, but I worry how far that's gone. I want to
Sure.
have the discussion. Like I said, I don't personally support abortion as a thing, but I don't feel comfortable saying, and you can't do it. It's like,
Yeah,
to me, it's the same
because you're
impulse.
principled.
It's the same impulse as the person saying you must use my pronouns. It's the exact same impulse of, it's just flipped the other way. So the reason I get a little defensive about the self, because I think the concept of us individual self is foundational to American principles, to
Absolutely.
the principles of liberty. And what we've lost in all of this madness is we just used to understand it. Like people walking around in the street, even if you had the most basic understanding of civics, one thing you could say about Americans is we had a strong sense of I'm an individual and you're an individual and don't
Yeah.
tread on me. We got that. Democrat, Republican, we all understood it. We've lost it. And it's now collectivism is good. Tribalism is good. You have no individual inalienable rights, but those that the collective allows you to have. And that's perfectly reasonable and virtuous. And if you think differently, you're a Nazi.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's well put, and it gives me something to chew on because I've spent a lot of time hammering this notion of narcissism, this what I like to refer to this leftist movement as the religion of self. That goes back to my scripture from an atheist piece. I do believe it's filling this void that is there. So I beat this idea of we need to what's the term I want to use too? It's not about what people can do as individuals. It's about what we champion and model as a society. And we need to not champion and model this religion of self, this narcissism, because it's causing such deleterious impacts across our culture. But you give me food for thought or grounds for good pause.
Yeah,
is the bad self.
Right. Well, narcissists are actually, one could think of them as hollow in the sense that they're so busy going out there and making objects out of other people because they have to do that. They don't have any core strength. They don't have any real belief in their own ability to survive on their own, to be okay by themselves, to make themselves happy in a good way, right? They have to go and use other people. That's the hallmark of a narcissist is exploitation and basically making objects out of other people. It's a kind, if they're very high in the narcissism scale, you're all the way to sociopathy. Okay.
Yeah.
But they are actually deeply, deeply insecure. Because a person with a healthy sense of self can be empathetic. That person can say, like, not only do I know that you're a separate person and I shouldn't step on your toes and interfere where I have not been asked to go, but you don't manipulate, you don't exploit, you don't lie, you don't need to. You tell the truth because if that person walks away, if that person won't do what you want them to do or be who you want them to be, you're going to be okay anyway. They're not the last person in the world who could help you or do for you or be there for you or love you or whatever it is. So narcissists have to, and if somebody rejects them, narcissistic rejection is rage.
Yeah.
They've been attacked.
We see that a lot right now.
It's like their whole identity. We see a lot of that, right? So yes, there is a kind of emphasis on these narcissistic traits, and the borderline is even worse because now you're like paranoid and all this other stuff. But the healthy self is the person who is interested in self-improvement, but not perfection.
Yeah.
They look at themselves as they understand they could be wrong, and that's okay. They're able to say, I don't know, and that's also okay. They don't need to know everything. They don't need to be better than anyone else. They don't need to get credit for every last thing that they do. They're comfortable sharing, the limelight. There's so many things about a person with a healthy sense of self. And I have to keep using the word. And the other reason I wanted to mention it is that the concept of that individual self is new in human history. It really aligns with the Enlightenment. Prior to the Enlightenment, people, the average person in the street, I'm not talking like the elite or the aristocracy, we take it for granted. We take it for granted that I am me and only me, and I'm just me, and I can decide who I want to be. That is new.
Yeah, that's a
People
great
used
point.
to be born into the world, and they were what they were told they were. They were told what class they were, what role they played, what jobs they could have, who they could be or hanging around with. It could be defined by their accent, for crying out loud.
Or go further back, and it was mandated by necessity in some cases.
It was exactly. So the idea that you would even have the luxury of imagining yourself, if you read Anthem by Ayn Rand, she so perfectly captures this, where you have this dystopian society without the first person singular pronoun. It just doesn't exist in the whole book. And it is the greatest sin of all the sins to think of yourself as a self. And so the way that this one guy, who's like the narrator of the whole story, kind of realizes he's different from everyone, is that he has this thing. He's like aware of himself, that he is a self. And you're not allowed to say I. It's like absolutely forbidden. You aren't allowed to prefer any one person over another person. I highly recommend this book to
I will
everyone.
read that book. It sounds fascinating.
It's very short. It's a little bitty short novella. You can read it in an hour. And when you get done with it, you're just like, oh my God, what she's done, similar to Kurt Vonnegut with Harrison Bergeron, is she's just taken where we are right now to its logical progression to with no limiting principle. That's where you end up.
Mhm.
That's what she did. She wrote
It's
that.
important to do that. That's a good analytical approach. I like doing that, playing things out to their logical conclusion.
I think it should be required reading for, every sort of like 8th grader, basically, because when you realize it, but especially because it eliminates that pronoun, because it lives in this pronoun prison.
Yeah.
And I just, I've read it multiple times. But it blows your mind when you realize that this idea of self, that I am me and I get to prefer this person to that person and this food to that food and living here over living there and that car or this job or whatever. These are new in our human evolution. They were really elevated to the highest height in the United States of America with our Constitution and Bill of Rights. They were enshrined literally in the law. And for the first time in human history. And what we are doing right now to our children is we are trashing that legacy. We are denying them that birthright. And we run the risk, because the rest of the Western world's already, they didn't have it really in the first place. Like we did, no right to self-defense, no right to free speech. So, they were already farther down, and they're going backwards from not having evolved all the way.
Yeah.
And we're following them back down to the dark ages. No, thanks. I don't want to go. I get angry. I get so fired up, and I get this ranty thing going on, because my biggest fear for our children is that one of the main reasons you had kids and I had kids was to reproduce this culture, because we believed in it. We wanted to pass that on. We wanted to see that actualized in other people and go, yay, good for you, and go be happy and just live life and repeat this on ad infinitum. And then when I'm dead, even though I don't believe in a heaven or anything, I feel like I'm on my deathbed if I get to be aware of it, and I'll be happy.
Absolutely. Your legacy lives on.
They're taking that away from all of us. And I'm to the point now, I don't know if you feel this way, but I'm to the point, even though I'm homeschooling now, but because my kids were in school for a while, where I can't even explain this to my own children. They don't completely understand it.
Wow. That's
I struggle and they live in my house, and like I said, homeschooled. My one is in college. The older one understands it better, not because she's older, but because she had more homeschooling from me before she went into school. But it is painful to look into the eyes of your own child and realize that this passion that you have, this love that you have for the idea of America, is just, what are you talking about?
Well, it's being powerful.
What are you
Powerful,
talking about?
yeah, powerful speech there. It's being, well, this is my own theory here. I don't mean to speak as if it's fact. It's being systematically eroded. I thought one of the most interesting things you touched on there was how this notion of the individual rights, where I'm going here, this notion of self was enshrined uniquely in mankind by our Bill of Rights and by our Constitution. So if you wanted to get rid of America, if you hated the American project and you felt it was a threat to objectives that you had, how would you attack and destroy those basic pillars of America? Or to put differently, what would be the ideological approach to destroy that? The answer would be the collective. And that's why this Marxist, this collectivist ideology is so penetrating at our country right now, because if you think about it, we are the front line of that. Have you ever read Ben Shapiro's book, How to Destroy America in 5 Easy Steps?
Nope. Mm-mm.
You should, whether you're a Shapiro fan or not. His understanding of civics is extraordinary. And I read that many years ago. And in a nutshell, it's exactly what it's about. He talks about how America is basically split into two different camps. It's those who believe we have individual rights that are inalienable, and that our government is merely there to protect those rights, to allow us to exercise individual rights, versus those who are more of the collectivist mindset, who believe that the function of our government is to create rights, that the government is the creator of rights, versus the government being the protector of inalienable individual rights. That is really the premise of Ben's book. And in a nutshell, it's saying that the latter approach inherently is designed like a wrecking ball to destroy the very fundamentals of what our country is about. And I don't think it is coincidental. That was poorly put. It is not at all coincidental that our children in the public school system no longer learn about the Articles of Confederation, no longer learn about the Federalist Papers, don't understand how the First Amendment and the Second Amendment ties together. And that's why we're seeing polling now, Deb, of upwards of 50% of liberals and like 30-40% of conservatives saying that free speech rights shouldn't be absolute, that there should be times when the government needs to tone it down. So my point is, it is heartbreaking what you laid out. Beyond just being personally heartbreaking, it is perilous for the American project itself if we allow future generations of youth to grow up not understanding what we're all about and what makes America so exceptional and what made us such a unique project. And not to drift back into the same boogeymen as always, but I can't help to drift back to those same Yuri Bezmenov interviews where he talks about this systematic approach, taking it 15 years at a time. Why 15 years? That's how long it takes to educate one generation inside our school system, educate them how, indoctrinate them away from these American principles. I mean, in my opinion, it's impossible not to see it as an overt revolution attempt, and it's one that used academia, the complete usurpation of our universities, and is now drilled down into our grade schools, and they're doing this to our kids from birth. And your story is quite interesting because you largely homeschooled your kids, and yet their principal American values were also eroded and whittled away because it's a cultural attack. It's bigger than
it's cultural, and then I have 3 kids, and the eldest obviously had the most homeschooling, so she entered the school at which she should have gone into 4th grade, but she missed the cutoff, so she went into 3rd grade. The next one went into 1st, but my baby went into kindergarten after divorce, so she really only got like preschool level with me. And in order, that's how well they read, that's how well they do math, and so on and so forth. And so and even I tell people, like, I have background in teaching. I had homeschooled my own kids before they went to school. Try as I might, on the margins, there's a limit to what you can do. You get pushback from your own kids. And for my eldest, not so much, but the other kids, it was like, Mom, you don't know. This is what the teacher says. Da, 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 da. And it's only after COVID, I got to take my youngest out. The other 2 came out of their own volition. They were like, I'm done with this crap. I'm like, I'm done. This is BS. And they left. But the youngest, COVID shut everything down because she was like, my friends, And then when she saw the stuff on virtual, she came to me one day. She goes, Mom, I have 70 late assignments. I said, I'm sorry, what? Wow. And I look at this busy work nonsense. And I was like, you're not doing that anymore. We're done. We're done. Like, somebody sue me. I don't care. We're done. We're not doing this. Pulled her out, put her into an online program, which at first seemed pretty good. Online, like homeschool program. because everyone was online at the point with COVID, but it was for homeschoolers. And at first it was pretty good. You know, I vetted it. The books were good. It were real books and all, you know, the stuff. And it seemed pretty good. And then the second year, things started to get a little more like, wait a minute, you're doing what in your what class? You're talking about mindfulness? What? You know?
Ugh.
So I started, and then she came to me. So now she's in 10th grade. So she went through that program from 7th, 8th, and 9th. Okay. And she said, okay, Mom, you know how I got an A in math last year? I said, yeah, that was great. And she said, yeah, I cheated.
Jeez.
I said, I'm sorry, what? And she said, I kind of had to. The teacher was so bad. I didn't understand what was going on, and I was afraid I would fail. And so I cheated. And my big fear is I actually don't know how to do it. Like I don't know the math, and I don't really understand percentages and decimal points, whatever. And this is a kid going into 10th grade.
Right. I was going to say building
And
blocks.
yeah. And she's like, I don't really understand what's going on. And she also said that she just felt like there was a lot of stuff they were doing that she just like, what are we talking about? It doesn't make any sense. I don't like what we're reading, etc. So she asked to be pulled out of that and for me to do like a la carte homeschooling, like the real homeschooling. So that's what we're doing now. And I'm able to customize and pick and choose, you know, the resources and so forth and so on and go at her pace. And it's a little challenging because she's so used to being assigned everything and this has a due date and this is here and this is there. And tragically, I'm finding that I have to adapt to that. I have to make strict deadlines and I have to, because she doesn't really know how to just self motivate to like just keep going or do stuff. And I said, well, I want you to have the freedom to do it. And she's like, no, I don't want that. I don't want that because I'll just not do it. I need to know it's going to be due today or I'm going to lose points, whatever.
Right.
And what do you say to a kid who's just been so trained that this is how I learn and I have to like do it this way and I got to, I understand needing structure. But
Right.
this is beyond that.
It's
And
different. Yeah, it's robotic.
I'm accommodating. I can, so I will. But when you homeschool from scratch in the very beginning, my little, 7 and 8-year-old were like going to the little box, taking their little stuff, doing their little lessons, And if that had kept going, I fully believe it would have kept going and they would have just been on their own at this point, with high school stuff, because you can teach a young kid how to do that and just build on it every year, scaffold to the point where they're just able to do it on their own. But if the way schools function, in addition to infantilizing them emotionally and doing all this therapy junk, they also infantilize them in terms of work, in terms of anything to do with accomplishment or achievement or completion or like production of anything resembling work product.
Yeah, it's an interesting anecdote you share, that the child who had its initial foundation built through the public system wasn't able to adapt on the individual basis like your other two were, who weren't primed that way. That's a powerful, that's a powerful story.
That's why, and that's also why I say, and that could have happened anyway. So I don't want to, obviously correlation is not causation.
That's true.
And I know that, but I just share the anecdote because I first of all, I happen to believe that's the reason. But I think it's important for parents to understand that whenever school tells you that their solution is one size fits all, it's no more one size fits all than homeschooling is. So it's not. And the difference is with homeschooling, you don't have to be one size fits all. You have 3 kids in the same house and do 3 completely different things if you so choose. Okay.
Yeah.
The school cannot. The school has to do what it has to do and it has to scale. And that's its mandate and that's its charter and that's what it has to do. And, parental rights aside, even if Governor DeSantis waved his magic wand and everybody had all the, the parental rights protected you thought you had in transparency galore, you still are existing in a democratic system where people get to vote and people get to decide what they want the money spent on here, there, wherever. And it's not always going to be what you would have wanted for your kid. And on top of that, to scale it, they have to put the kids in a room. They have to assign them to a teacher. It's all assigned. It's all decided at some level that isn't you. And even if they go, here's what we're doing, you individually can't go, that's not going to work for my kid.
Yeah.
Even if you know that it's not.
Yeah, it's tough to do a national approach to anything. I mean, you could analogize that to restaurants or something. You're never going to get the type of customized experience in a national franchise at any one of their stops as you are a one-off type of place. And I even struggle that with as a kid, not has nothing to do with leftist indoctrination. It's crazy how fast this radicalization of our schools has happened. It's been seeding and advancing the long march through the institutions for decades. In fact, before I was born. But it's crazy how fast it rapidly usurped everything in the last 10 or 20 years.
Yep.
But I struggled with that even from I got work done quickly. I understood lessons quickly. So I got bored in class. Other kids needed 3-4 rounds to understand it. I understood it on one. So I got in trouble talking to friends and making paper airplanes. And that's sort of where gifted programs came from and stuff. But it's the same problem. We can't create a very individualized approach when we're doing it for 180 million people.
No.
So
and
yeah,
their approach now is to say, oh, student voice, and let the students learn and let the students direct. Well, just because you're gifted or you're quick doesn't mean you know exactly what you need to learn.
Right. You wouldn't
You
want students
still
directing
need some
anything.
instruction or some guidance or some leadership or something to point you in the direction. You need a mentor. You need somebody. And you may not need them as much for as much time or in the same way as somebody else. But this notion that just, you're super brilliant. You'll be fine. Let's just go sit you in a corner and you go figure it out and learn some stuff. I mean, that's what they did with a lot of gifted kids. They're like, they'll be fine. They're just, they're fine. And they misunderstand giftedness even. So there's so many layers. We could probably talk for like another 100 hours on this. But the point, I guess, coming back to the very beginning about the therapy and the teachers are not therapists, is that teachers at this point are barely teachers. They're not doing the basic stuff that we thought they were there to do with the reading, the writing, the math, the history, all the stuff. They're not even doing that. And now you want to saddle them. And I say saddle them because there are plenty who don't want to do it and they're still stuck doing it. Now, not you, the parent, but like the system wants them to start to psychoanalyze your kids or observe your kids for their moods and things. This is just lunacy on its face.
Yeah, I mean, it's summed up by a 3-letter acronym, isn't it? SEL, social emotional learning. I mean, that's really the elephant in the room here is we have to ask ourselves, how did we go from reading, writing, and arithmetic to social emotional learning? Because they don't look the same at all. They're completely different products. They're completely different approaches, and they're completely different objectives. One is there to teach our kids how to do math, how to read, how to have basic educational basics. The other is the psychoanalyst digging into their heads. It's the morning sessions of, the navel gazing. What's wrong with you guys? What makes you sad? How bad are your family sessions? Why are schools even poking and prodding in those directions? I don't understand. I had a
and any person that tells you guys in the audience that your kids have to be perfectly mentally well before they can learn is lying to you.
Yeah,
they don't.
It's an insane concept.
It's not true.
I asked my wife one time, my wife's a lifelong educator. She's got a master's degree in elementary education. She still works in school. She's on the admission testing side now. But she was a grade school teacher for a long time, mostly kindergarten. And when I started really reading into social emotional learning, so this is maybe 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 2, when I started to really understand how nefarious that is as a vehicle itself, meaning in my opinion, SEL is a portal for pretextual use. When that light bulb started to go off, I kind of started to digging into it, kind of like a holy crap moment. Like, how do we get here? Why did this get in our schools? And what ultimately is the goal? I'm doing similar analysis now in sex ed, by the way, but that's a conversation for another day. So as part of this sort of personal investigation of what the hell's going on with SEL, I brought this up with my wife one night when we were just shooting the you-know-what on the couch. So it wasn't like I was like, hey, I need to talk to you about something. So this was a very organic conversation. And I started to ask her about social emotional learning. Are you familiar with SEL? Of course she is. She got her undergrad in the late 90s. She graduated with her master's in 2001. So just to give you a framework of where we are historically when she's being educated as a teacher. And what was so interesting about our conversation, Deb, and I don't really remember the specifics, the nuts and bolts, but I remember sort of the general theme was that my wife simultaneously had a bunch of exposure to social emotional learning throughout her teacher's program, but also saw it as nothing but a positive. Or maybe a better way to put that is she saw no negative tentacles from the beast that I see as social emotional learning. And I started to kind of poke and probe on her a little bit with that because she didn't really understand where I was going with this. I didn't preface this all with, I think SEL is evil. Tell me about it. It was like, hey, do you know SEL from your program? Did you learn about it? Was it part of your curriculum? Was it part of a... And man, it was so eerie to me, Deb, because she dropped so many of the leftist spell words without even realizing she was using them. She was telling me reasons why SEL was important. but it was like it was going through a translator. And what was coming out of the speaker to me was a whole bunch of leftist scripture and spell words. And it was just so striking to me that it made me realize 2.5 decades ago, almost 3, when she's being taught, they are being turned into an army of psychoanalyst, emotional probing, ideologue educators, and they don't even realize it. And I remember at one point I said to her, like, but why are we asking children about this? And she said some line along the lines of like, well, in that age level is when I was asking specifically about why we push sex categories and queer plus activism in schools. Like, why does an elementary kid even need to understand that bisexual means you're sexually aroused by both penises and vaginas? Like, why are we even saying this to elementary kids? I don't talk to my own children about that at 8, at 9, at 10 years old. So that was kind of the angle I had come in on. And it was like, why are we bringing this up? And she said, she used some line that was like, well, as that age is when they start really opening up to, and I kind of paused her and I said, but opening up for what? What are they opening up for? What is the objective here? What door is opening that we're launching the state inside at that age? And Deb, she couldn't answer the question. It was almost like 10 years of her
repeating
training.
the dogma.
Yes. And it was almost like her brain for the first time was contemplating, oh, shoot, what is this apparatus doing? What is the goal of this? Because she had been cult like zombie to believe she was doing good. And it was like for the first time, I think she was realizing maybe it was doing bad in the name of good. I think it was an even more powerful conversation for her.
They don't question these premises. So one of the things I try to do on this channel is I try to go back to first principles. I try to go back to the premises and say, like, what is the belief that is underpinning this?
Yeah.
What would it have to be?
Yeah.
So, and then what you can do sometimes is say, so do you believe X? You can say to the people. And then if they're like caught frozen, like, why do you ask that? Like, well, because in order for you to do this to these children, you must believe that this is so, and sometimes they'll admit it. Some will say, yes, I believe all parents are terrible. Yeah. They'll say it out loud. And then the crazy is on display. So, if you ask them, so do you really believe that most parents are incapable of seeing to their children's best interest, and that most parents are bigots, and most parents really secretly just like ignore their kids and don't care about their kids? And you will see there will be some teachers who will say, yes, I actually really believe that that person should be anywhere near a child ever.
The true zealous. What was so striking about my conversation with my wife is that I'm not sure she had even stopped to contemplate what is the goal of this? What is the purpose of this design? Right. What is the objective? It's as if the beneficial value was inherent. And now let's cast it over to something like white supremacy, because again, these are all tentacles of the same beast. It's a similar analysis or lack thereof over there. Yeah. We propose these anti-racist or critical race theory methods of XYZ that all of us think are radical and crazy. Like, why are we doing this to the kids? Well, the reason we're doing it is ending racism, because America is white supremacy. But we never connected those first dots. Like, wait a minute, is it white supremacy? So going back to what we're just talking about here with my wife in particular, I don't think she had ever stopped to think, are we doing the right thing? Is there a need here? Is there a positive objective from a state perspective in why we're doing this? Through her teaching and development apparatus, Deb, it had just been drilled into her brain that it was inherently righteous to be doing this. The only question was, which praxis will we deploy? And see, that's why I analogize it to the white supremacy. The phantom, the boogeyman, the problem, the need is assumed. And then all the praxis carries from that. But I want to challenge the initial conclusion, because I think the initial conclusion is errant.
That's it. It's also a perfect place for us to wrap up.
It is. And just to pat myself on the back here, I started today in a hotel bed in Orlando. I got the family checked out of the hotel, drove home, unloaded the car, dropped them off, came to my office, put in a half work day, and now I did your show. So it was a hell of a day for
Yes. Thank you. And I'm so grateful. I'm lucky. I'm so grateful. I thank you so much for being here, and
well, thank you.
And sharing all of your thoughts. It was a great conversation. We'll have to do it again sometime, think about some other topics and approaches. But yeah, give that. I would love to see you dig into that whole self concept thing.
Yeah, I will.
Because I want to see more of us on, in this realm, protecting the healthy concept of self and not letting people, authoritarians on the other side, trash it, for their needs.
Push spectrum too far the other way. Yeah.
We gotta hold on to that.
Yeah, and you
If
gave
you
me a good
listen
thing to chew on there.
James's podcast about Christian nationalism, you'll see what I'm talking about. I want to get into this a whole other show, but that will kind of like the spark, the little light bulb will go on in your head, like, oh, that's what Deb is talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's important because
and
we run that risk.
Yeah, and I will chew on that in good faith because I hammer against that.
So you guys follow Theo on X, whatever, Facebook, whatever you want to call it. And yours is
Theo _ TJ _ Jordan.
Theo _ something.
Yeah, Theo _ TJ _ Jordan.
Okay. Theo _ okay, so I'm going to type this out.
So it's
here.
Theo TJ Jordan, but there's underscores in the middle. I don't know. A lot of names were reserved. I had to come up with something on the fly.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah, but I'd love to do this again sometime. I just wanted to tell you, Deb, I admire you very much. There's a lot of people who are putting a lot of energy into print and talking about things online. And I appreciate everybody who's swinging the axe and chopping the tree. But then there's other people who have really dedicated their life to this and are really pushing this in the direction of tangibles and moving things. And I feel like you're in that latter category, and I respect the heck out of you for it. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. And thank you for being here. And everybody, Theo also has a Substack, so you can check that out. I put that up in the banner earlier, theojordan.substack.com. And please, again, like and share this broadcast so more people can see it, hear it. And I know it's long, just like the last two things I did were long, but some of these things require a level of analysis that you can't get done in 60 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not that easy.
Absolutely. It was a great talk. I'd love to do it again. Thanks a lot for your time, Deb.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And everybody have a great evening. Take it easy.